To everyone who has joined us here today, we thank you for coming together. As a part of the Neev community, it is truly an honor to see so many of us here today. To the authors who have given us insights into concepts and cities beyond our own, we thank you for taking the time to be here and for sharing your stories. Over the past few years, the Literature Festival has given me the chance to listen to and interact with authors and books from my country. An opportunity I've never had before, neither to engage with those authors who write about India, nor to be even able to connect with an author beyond a book. To be able to converse with writers beyond pages is an experience that is truly illuminating. An inherent sense of a bond is formed that ties me to the books that I have read and those who have written them. I am very proud to be part of a unique occasion such as this. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day as much as I am sure I will, and are able to grasp with empathy and compassion ideas, thoughts, and beliefs apart from your own. Before we move on to our next segment, let's hear from a student of grade 10 who will speak about one of his favorite books. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about Room on the Roof by Ruskin Bond. So I like the book because, first of all, it was written from a teenage perspective. So I am a teenager, so it relates to me in that. He was 17 when he wrote it, and it was inspired by his own experiences from when he lived in Dehradun. I too have also spent quite a bit of time in that Mussoorie Dehradun area because my grandparents lived there, and his descriptions of the settings were just brilliant.
Good afternoon. My name is Kartika and I love to read. Taking my cue from Ronak and Soham, I want to ask you, haven't we all experienced a feeling of deep satisfaction when the words on a page resonate with our lived experience? It is this essence that we seek to celebrate and amplify with the Neev Book Award 2021. We began the Neev Book Award in 2017 to find great children's books for all ages from India and about Indian lives. Taking inspiration from Professor Rudine Sims Bishop, often referred to as the mother of multicultural literature, we want to showcase books that to the Indian identity are mirrors which reflect a child's own experience, windows when they offer a different view into the lives and experiences of others, and doors that allow children to trust their imagination and enter a different world. There is no denying that we've all lived through a difficult year, encountering varying degrees of despair as the weeks wore on in the face of a global health crisis. And yet, here we are today, celebrating the incredible resilience of the 23 authors on the shortlist, whose books have been brought out by 14 gritty, bold, path-breaking publishers and deliberated upon by a 9-member jury for months on end. All of their work culminates in the big announcement of the 4 award winners later today. In a year such as this, in this moment that seems bigger than all of us, we feel it is only fitting to have the announcement of the Neev Book Awards 2021 opened by one of India's most beloved writers, a recipient of the Padma Bhushan, the Padma Shri, and the Sahitya Academy Award, who has by turn regaled us, sent chills down our spine, and filled us with nostalgia, all with his writing. It is our honor and privilege to invite Mr. Ruskin Bond, our keynote speaker, on screen. Welcome, Ruskin.
Thank you so much. It's it's wonderful to know that you're giving an award to writers of children's books. You know, such awards didn't exist 50, 60, 70 years ago when I set out to write. And there were, in fact, very, very few publishers in those days who bothered to bring out children's books. And so we grew up to a great extent on children's books, classics from abroad. And one really had to hunt for a book about India by an Indian author in the 1950s, 60s, even 70s. I was very lucky that I discovered R.K. Narayan and his Malgudi stories when I was just out of school. And of course, there were a number of other very outstanding Indian writers, but they were mostly writing for the general reader. So it's wonderful today to see so many young writers or even middle-aged writers writing for children, and to find publishers now taking the trouble to bring out children's books and discovering for themselves that children's books can be successful and can even be profitable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Ruskin. On that note, I think this is a great time for me to invite Mr. Colin Kelman on stage. Mr. Colin is a member of the jury of the Neev Book Award 2021 and a literature himself. He will be in conversation with Ruskin Bond on the topic Ruskin Stories, India Stories. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karthika, and thank you, Ruskin, and welcome everyone to this. I'm glad you can all join us this afternoon for the Neev Book Award and for this absolutely lovely conversation with Ruskin Bond that I'm looking forward to. You know, just before you all came on live, Ruskin and a few of us were chatting about his visits to Bangalore, and we were also talking about how diverse the audience is at a Ruskin Bond event. That with any other writer, you'd get a specific, what people call a target audience. I don't think there is such a target with Ruskin Bond. It's everyone from people who are 6 years old to people who, as Ruskin just told us, who've grown old with him. And indeed, we've got our maths teachers who are excited about it. We've got our economics teachers. We've got a whole range of people who are excited about listening to Ruskin Bond. And so it's interesting how we're going to have this conversation and make it accessible to all of you. But we hope at the end that, you know, this will be an introduction to something new that you might discover about your favorite writer, Ruskin. And so Ruskin, if we can start straight away, let me try and take you back as far as you can go by asking you, what were your earliest memories of writing? You know, writing that came from special encouragement from teachers or parents. And what was the nature of this?
Well, it goes, I have a good memory from my childhood, and I think I started out as a writer when I was 7 or 8, and I would make lists. I was a great one for making lists of books I'd read, lists of films I'd seen, lists of songs I liked, lists of flowers, trees, anything. I was a maker of lists, but it was only, I think, when I was 12 or 13 in school that my teachers thought that I was good at writing essays. And then I went on through my school years to do well in English language and literature and pick up the odd prize. And I was lucky in that we had a good library in the school I went to. That's all important, I think, to any budding young writer. You need to have books around you. And I was a bookworm. And I was very cunning. I got myself put in charge of the library, and I was given a key to the library. So whenever I wanted to escape horrible things like early morning PT or extra homework or maths tuition, I wasn't very good in maths, I would escape to the library, lock myself in and read. And I read every book there almost, hundreds of books in the end. From all the classics, all the contemporary writers of that time, biography, plays. And today, looking back on my years as a writer and a reader, I have to say, I am really today a reader first and a writer second. Put it that way.
That's lovely, Ruskin. In fact, I had another question planned, but I'm going to switch to another one since you mentioned that. In fact, this question that I have, I wanted to begin with a disclaimer. It's about your reading. I'm not asking you this as a typical question that people would ask any author. You know, the typical question is, what were the books you like to read, or do you like to read now? But the reason I'm asking you this is because I think while you are celebrated as a writer, I don't think you've been sufficiently celebrated or rewarded as a reader. And I think you would have still been really famous even if you didn't write books solely. I think on your reading, you would have done really well. And so, you know, sometimes I think some of this manifests itself in the works that you've compiled and edited. And so, you know, focusing on your authority as a reader rather than with reference to your ability as a writer, can you tell us who are the writers who you actually enjoy reading as a discerning reader? And what has stayed with you of them? What could it be, subject matter or style or techniques?
Well, it's an interesting question. You know, my tastes in reading have varied a bit over the years, and today I find myself I like reading biographies. I like reading books about other writers, or anyone for that matter who's done anything interesting. It could be explorers or naturalists or even or travelers or scientists, but writers particularly, because it's interesting to see how they work and how they can go sometimes from failure to success, because we often start with failures. And on the other hand, too, the tragedy of being very successful and then meeting with failures and going downhill, because that can also be a terrible a way to end one's career. And it's happened to many writers over the years. So writers themselves and their lives interest me, and history too. And of course, I read over the years a lot of fiction, all the well-known authors of the 1940s, 50s, plays too. And I enjoy reading detective fiction. What else? In the morning, I'll read all the newspapers. So you will always, I read everything, in fact. Give me something in print. Sometimes I read the leaflets that come with the newspapers, you know, the advertising leaflets. For soaps or toothpaste or things. It's all anything in print. It's sort of an obsession almost with me.
So Ruskin, maybe I'll put you on the spot. Are there any names that stand out immediately? If a name came to you right now, who would you mention?
Writers: Graham Greene, J.B. Priestley, Somerset Maugham. These were all writers of the 30s, 40s. Compton, Mackenzie, and then, if you want me, crime writers, going back, of course, I've read everything by Agatha Christie or Marjorie Allen, or even the tough ones in America, and Raymond Chandler and others. So I get a bit disturbed nowadays because a lot of contemporary writers of crime fiction dwell a little too much on the sadistic side of life, and they have torture scenes and that sort of thing. But you see that in films too. So
Yes.
when a little girl of 10 came up to me and said, "Sir, I like your ghost stories, but they're not scary enough," she said. "Can't you make them more frightening?" So I realized that it's very difficult to frighten young people nowadays, maybe because of what they are exposed to on the television channels very often. So things that scare me don't seem to scare others sometimes. So I feel sometimes maybe I'm really a little out of touch.
Indeed. I've got a couple of questions on that, and I think many of our readers are interested in what you write about and why you've chosen to write the way you do. But I'd like to circle back a bit to our LitFest as well. And you've lived in India all your life. You've written in India, and since we are discussing your influences, what was it about India? What is it about India that has influenced you that, say, couldn't come from anywhere else?
Oh, many things. Yes, you don't run out of stories in India. You don't run out of people. You don't run out of different things. Because if I did spend 2 or 3 years in England and Europe, but life doesn't vary much there from, say, even one country to another. Languages change, but the lifestyles, their so-called civilization is very similar. So you don't get that tremendous variety and of language, ethnicity, um, customs, lifestyles that you get in India. And it varies every 50 to 100 miles, actually. If you travel throughout the country, you keep finding something new, something different. Um, so you just cannot run out of ideas or themes. Huh? There's never a dull moment and never a
Yeah,
dull.
indeed, it reminds me of, all of India is a bit like the Grand Trunk Road in Kim.
Yes.
All manners of people going up and down. I suppose, I suppose that's what you're referring to. The
Yes.
way I suppose Kipling was influenced by the people of India.
Yes, and but of course with Kipling, he wrote out of culture. He didn't spend much time in India, just a few years as a young man, uh, working on a newspaper. But he took those sights and sounds away with him and put them to good use later on. Because all those books, Kim and the Jungle Books and all, were actually written when he was living in America. But he took India with him. You say you can't leave it behind if you do go away. And when I went away as a 17-year-old to the UK, I was in a great hurry to come back again, but it took me about 4 years to do that. And it took my first book to enable it to happen.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. When I was preparing for this interview, because I've read so many of the other stories, I decided to do a random lookup, and I picked a random story of yours, and the one that turned up was the man called Kipling.
Oh,
Interestingly,
you're more of a sketch or
yes,
it was an essay in a way, an imaginative one, meeting Kipling's ghost outside the
in the museum, yeah.
museum. And he was very apologetic, Kipling's ghost, for some of the things he said about India, because he was a rank imperialist and an unapologetic one. But he could write well too, and he could tell a good story.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Ruskin. And now, I'd like to move on to aspects of your work and your craft because that's what all our readers are interested in. And you have a clearly defined, I suppose, style, and there are clearly defined themes and even images. Now, just to name a few: childhood, growing up, nostalgia, solitude, innocence, and of course there are what some people might even call Ruskin Bond images. So I mean, you could spot a Ruskin Bond story without your name attached to it. I suppose, like trains and the railway stations, right? So what aspects of these themes and images really come together for you to be able to use them this way? Why do you like them so much?
Well, I guess it goes back to childhood. And I did have a difficult childhood, which I think many writers have had difficult childhoods. It does maybe help to make them writers in a way. So, and even when I set out to write, I often wrote about childhood. In the beginning, it was my own, but as I grew older, I began writing about other children, maybe in their exploits or problems or lives. And and it wasn't really till I was about 40 that I actually started writing stories for children, because a lot of what I'd written before was written for the general reader. Some of it was found suitable for children and even went into schools, but it wasn't necessarily written for the young reader in mind. But it was only, say, when I was in my 40s, a good 20 years after I'd been writing, that I started writing stories and books aimed for the young reader. And so I did go back actually to write about very often my own boyhood or that of boys and girls I'd known, or sometimes, of course, you invent characters. So I wrote about childhood, I wrote about growing up, and in the process, I became nostalgic. And you look back, we all get nostalgic about childhood sometimes and remember the good things and forget the unhappy times. And even unhappy times get a sort of rosy glow around them when you look back over the years. And ghost stories, I have to confess here and now that I haven't really met a ghost. But I keep meeting people who've seen them or know them. So I use their experiences, in writing these stories. But though I'm an innocent person in many ways, I'm also pragmatic in others. And one thing I'm proud of is that for these 70 years of writing that I've been going through, for most of them, I've actually managed to make a living with my words and sentences. And that was difficult back in those days, in the 50s, 60s, even 70s, because we didn't have many publishers around here. You had to look abroad sometimes for a publisher, as did R.K. Narayan and Mulk Rajanand and all our writers from that period. So there it is. Looking back.
at those important things. Yes.
Of growing old is that there's so much to look back upon. And it's important, though, to have a good memory. You don't want to forget all of it.
Indeed. And we hope more of it comes through in your books, the ones for the future. But Ruskin, I'd like to pick up on what you said about that 10-year-old girl. You said that 10-year-old girl met you and said your stories, your ghost stories, are not scary enough. And just like you've done special things with stories in trains and at railway stations where people just have a moment to meet a stranger or a little time with them.
All those train stories, they were all written when I was in my 20s practically. And in India in those days, everybody traveled by train. Our air services hadn't really been, hadn't come of age. They were starting out, but most people traveled by train. And as I did. And also I've found railway stations, trains, and journeys, and even little small stations had an atmosphere which appealed to me. So there were stories like Night Train at Deoli, and The Eyes Have It, and The Woman on Platform 8, and so many others, which we sort of set at railway stations or in trains themselves, because that's where you found stories. That's where you saw people or met them. And I would actually go sometimes to a railway station and buy a platform ticket and sit there on a bench doing nothing for an hour or two, just watching people coming and going and, and what was happening around me. So, and I haven't done that for many years because it's sometimes since I've traveled by train, now it's become unusual actually for me to travel by train. It's all, car journeys if it's within a reasonable distance, or air if you have to go further afield. And also train journeys are not as romantic as they used to be. All the windows now have thick glazed glass. You can't see out of them. In the old days, you could put the shutter up and down and stick your head out, and maybe you could have it knocked off too by a signal, as happened to friends of mine. But and all sorts of things happened on a railway journey, including having my watch stolen. I remember I had to the window while I was asleep at night, and my spectacles disappeared.
Yeah,
going around half blind for 2-3 days till I made another pair. So all things happened when you traveled by train, but it seems.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought actually, because many people want to write, they're ambitious to write children as well. And the thought that you have about going to where the stories are sometimes, like railway stations, you've got to find those places for yourself as well.
Yes. Sometimes you have to look for a story, true. Sometimes they come to you, Or sometimes you just dream them. I keep a dream book too. I put down dreams, interesting dreams, and occasionally they've resulted in a story.
That's interesting.
Yes.
But coming back to the ghost story, Ruskin, like you did that with trains, what are you trying to do with your ghost stories? Is there an aspect of human beings or human thinking that you're exploring with your ghost stories?
Yeah, well, in a way, I mentioned dreams, and ghost stories sometimes are dreams, or they emanate from dreams. Um, but I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to entertain the reader, and young people seem to like ghost stories. It's a sort of safe fear connected with them. You know, you can scare yourself, but at the back of your mind, you know, it's not really happening. So it's a safe fear. Um, and I one of one of the first books I discovered when I was 9 or 10, when I was in my mother and stepfather had taken me on a shikar trip out in the jungles near Dehradun, and I wasn't interested in guns or shooting animals, and I stayed behind in the forest rest house, and there I discovered an old bookshelf, um, thick with dust, and nobody had used it for years, and then I started reading. And in that week, I read a number of books, and I discovered the ghost stories of M.R. James and Algernon Blackwoods and others. And so, in a way, I was influenced by other writers, as we all are. I mean, I think I'm only a writer because I was a reader. And so there it is. So those ghost stories had impinged on my mind, and I felt later on I must write a few myself, and try and create an atmosphere, actually. That's the thing.
Yes, in fact, that's what I think many readers have appreciated, including myself, that the atmosphere takes a lot to construct. It's not as easy to construct an atmosphere.
So it's not easy, but that's one of the charms and pleasures of writing, is to create an atmosphere, yeah, with your words and sentences. Oh,
Yes, indeed.
of course.
So Ruskin, now you are in a unique position in that your first story was in the 1950s in India that you had it published. I think it was the Illustrated Weekly,
Yes, oh,
and that makes this year about 70 years
about
since you became a writer. Now,
a story published, yeah.
yes. So and indeed, because of that, you were perhaps one of the only people on that landscape of Indian writing, including writing for young people. So, keeping that in mind, that position, how have you seen this landscape change? You know, writers, the other people who've come and stood next to you now, and especially writing for young people as well. What have been your observations of it over these 70 years?
Yes, you see, back in the 50s and 60s, most of our publishers were academic publishers. They published school books and textbooks or college books, but there was very little general publishing, and practically no books for children were being published in India. Hardly any. So again, kids growing up here, like myself, you depended on books from abroad, the children's classics that came one's way, and I read those. And you also, at that period, you went very quickly from maybe children's books to adult books. There wasn't a gradual um, transition from, say, reading books for, you didn't have what they have today, stories for 8 to 12-year-olds, stories for 12 to 14-year-olds, and stories for young adults, or books for young adults. It was, you read children's books, and then suddenly you were reading adult books, or and I think it was part of the school process too, because I know you would find yourself in class 8 suddenly having to study Conrad or Thomas Hardy or writers of that nature who were not writing for children. Huh? So that I remember the children's books that I enjoyed, which would have been about children, like the Williams stories. He was a wicked little boy who who was, and I still read the odd one because it's nice to read about, you know, an unkempt, untidy child who is always in trouble, rather than a good one. So I used to read the Williams stories, and then you went on to adventure and, and Stevenson and Treasure Island and all that. And then you were reading then I was reading Wuthering Heights when I was 12. And so are kids today, because I think now they develop very quickly. So I remember going to a school in some years back, I won't say where it was, and they had prescribed one of my, as a extra reader, a novel of mine which was quite explicit and which was really meant for adults. I don't think they'd read it beforehand. Sometimes, it just got prescribed. So, and I had to tell them, I don't think this is quite right for class 8 or 9. Keep it for college students. So sometimes because I've written for so many different genres, that sometimes maybe a story like Night Train at Deoli, which was in the ICSC syllabus one year, or several years, I found it was also being read a couple of years back in class 3 or 4, which is fine. A great idea, because I think children are very quickly now, advancing into adult literature. So I think all books are sort of coming together in a way. And I never did like the idea of them. This is for 8-year-olds, and this is for 10-year-olds, and this is for 12-year-olds. We become book lovers and readers at different ages. Somebody can discover books when they're in their 30s and become a reader. So I think perhaps.
Yes. Indeed, thanks for that, Ruskin. Those thoughts, excellent. That we've got to actually consider that how at what pace children become readers and at what stages in their lives they take on things naturally, I think.
It varies.
Yes. So Ruskin, I think I'll manage to squeeze in one more question before we move to our audience questions, and I've got several, but we'll have to keep that for another time. I'm going to switch to one that is perhaps not a question, but something I think that's important. That I'd like to invite you to comment on two aspects of your work that don't receive much attention. And I'd like to draw our listeners' attention to them, because I think you're one of the few people in India, the few writers who actually practice these forms. So the first is, I think, your love of nature and your keen observation of it. And I think perhaps you are the closest we have to nature writing, one of the closest writers we have to someone who does nature writing. The second is you as a practitioner of the familiar or the personal essay, perhaps in the style of William Hazlitt or Charles Lamb. Again, not a popular form these days. And I think people don't consider this when they assess Ruskin Bond. They look at his short stories, all excellent, and they look at some of his novels. But as an Indian author who's working on these two forms that are so rare, what would you like to say about them?
Yes, I'm an essayist by nature. Ever since my school days, I loved writing the personal essay, as you mentioned, Hazlitt and Charles Lamb, and then you come down in later years to essayists that I read were like J.B. Priestley and others in the 40s. So the essay form always intrigued me, but you're right, it's not a popular form. And if I've brought out occasionally the odd collection of essays, they haven't done as well as my short stories or novellas or other books. So, but after all, we must write what gives us pleasure. And if our writing gives us pleasure, that's the important thing. And the other, nature, of course. Nature, as I've grown older, nature, I think, has taken over my life, and I've become more and more a nature writer. When I was a young writer in my 1720s, I took nature for granted, as most of us do. But I think it's now that I see the living things that are there in nature and what it can give you by way of so many things, comfort, happiness, a response. You can just trees, flowers, mountains, rivers, streams, birds. I mean, what would be this? It would be a terrible. This is the only green planet, as far as we know, that's in existence. We haven't yet really discovered another one as green as this. So surely it's unique, and we must really appreciate every little thing that grows on it. The greatest miracle of all is just that seed in the ground, sprouting, coming up, a little stem, branches, leaves, flowers, fruit, all within a year maybe. So, I mean, we take
Yes.
things for granted, and yet they are
Yes.
miraculous in
Yeah,
themselves.
indeed, those are aspects of India as well that have come through in your essays as well as in your writing about nature.
All
But
here.
I think yes.
Nature.
Karthika is here with some of the audience questions for you. Over to
Thank,
Karthika.
thank you so much, Ruskin and Colin. This has been so pleasurable to listen to both of you having a conversation on books and writing and how India has been evolving. So, Ruskin, we have some interesting questions that have come up from the audience. We have Jigyasa Dikshit, who asks you, if you would like to explore some genres that you haven't worked on yet, what would these be?
Yeah, to explore some genres that I haven't really worked on yet. Let me see. I'm not a great traveler, so I would have to write a travel book, have to go somewhere interesting. And the days of exploration are practically long gone, because every corner of this planet has more or less been discovered or explored now. But I would like to have written sea stories, but then for that I would have had to be a sailor or a merchant seaman like Conrad or John Masefield or Stevenson, or someone who spent a lot of time at sea. Sea stories, I love reading them. So I would have liked to perhaps written about the sea, as I've written about the mountains. It would make a nice contrast. What else? And I've always felt I should write a good detective story. And I tried once, but it was a flop. But by chapter 2, the reader knew who was the killer or the murderer, so there was no surprise ending in it, which I think a detective story is supposed to have. So really my detective story was more not about who did it, but why did he do it or she do it? But I'm this time yet. Maybe I'll do that detective story.
Excellent. And we'll all wait in line to get a copy of the book when it's out.
Oh gosh, thank you.
Ruskin, we have another question from Arush RP, who asks, between your first novel to the more recent ones, how have your writing methods evolved or changed? Which of such aspects would you recommend to new authors to adopt or adapt early on? And also, if you have some advice for young writers on what they can do to develop their interest in writing.
Well, I could go on for a long time about advice to young writers. Not advice, but help or helpful ideas. Well, first you have to be a reader before you're a writer. Then you must at least have a reasonable command of the language in which you're going to write, whether it's English or Hindi or Kannada or Tamil or Malayalam or Bengali. Be at ease in your language, because you're going to use it to create a story or to create something. So a lot of, I think, young people rush into print without sometimes, to be frank, learning to spell. So at least get the basics right, and then give rein to your imagination or invention. And I would never discourage anyone from writing, because after all, it's a creative outlet, and if you're good at it, well, then of course you then go ahead and write and even make a career out of it. But I think just don't rush into it. Get the basics right. Be confident in yourself, and let your friends read what you've written, see what they think about it. Don't ask mommy and daddy to pay 2 lakhs to a vanity publisher to bring out your book just because you want your name on it. I mean, in due course, if you're any good, publishers will come to you. So you don't have to run after them. So those are some of the tips to writers. And what was the other part of the question?
The other part was about your own writing, Ruskin, between your first novel and to the recent ones.
It hasn't changed much over the years. Maybe it's not, you see, my first novel was very intense, and I was an adolescent when I wrote it, and it's about adolescence. It's emotional, it's intense, and perhaps over the years I've calmed down a bit. But my style hasn't changed a great deal. I do try to improve my writing. One of my favorite books is the Oxford English Dictionary. Sometimes I just sit down and go through it and discover new words or the origin of words. And so that's interesting. So, but I was looking at dipping into The Room on the Roof recently, after a long time. It was my first novel, which I wrote when I was 17, 18. And I said, my goodness, I was obsessed with semicolons. I was semicolons all over the place. And now I've dropped, I don't use semicolons very much, So these little things change as you go along, perhaps. Huh?
Nice, that's an interesting insight. We'll look out for the semicolons next time.
The story of the semicolon, I'll write.
Indeed. On that note, I think we have one last question that we can squeeze in, Ruskin. From Paul Mehta, who asks you, and this is relevant to what you just said, because you've been writing for so many years. You've talked about the fact that you like writing because it's something that gives you pleasure. What is it about writing that still excites you?
Right. Words, putting together sentences to make a beautiful sentence sometimes, or just catching and recording a particular moment. Or the atmosphere around you, or just if I see at my desk and in the morning and I see a little ladybird walking across the desk and climbing up a plant at the end, and I mean that's an epic in itself, and I want to capture that moment because small creatures, they have their lives too, and moments, I think, of great achievement, just to see a tiny ant carrying a huge seed, across the room. It's impressive. So all these, so it's the little things, sometimes that most writers take for granted, but which I think are important and which should be captured sometimes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ruskin. I'll leave it to Colin now.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. It was an absolute pleasure listening to you, and I hope you'll come back again and talk to all of us, and we can have this conversation once more.
To Colin.
Thank you so much, Ruskin and Colin. Thank you so much. It's been lovely having both of you here. Thank you. We'll now move into the next segment of the event, which is a conversation that we will get into with the panelists of the early years category. We will have a student from Neev who will take over and tell you a little more about the books that she loves and about what's coming up next. Over to you, Mehika.
I love how, although the books are simple, they don't fail to introduce the early readers to our culture. culture and essence of our country. Any book you read, it holds many occasions that immerse blossoming readers into its story through its vivid pictorial imagery and descriptive words. And each year, the nominated books are invariably able to convey compelling and complex concepts and transform them into elementary stories and texts that even children can relate to and empathize with. One of the titles on the 2019 shortlist, the book Red, is one such example. This book takes the horrifying topic of war and reconstructs those very same topics into a picture book that anyone will be able to resonate with. Similarly, the book, The Big Thoughts of Little Love, deals with the disturbing subject of gender stereotypes that continue to be propagated even today. Introducing topics such as these to young children through this whimsical and playful medium fosters a critical and curious mindset that is crucial in empowering a generation which is able to face the harsh realities of the world that we live in today. Now, why don't we watch one of our youngest readers speak about her favorite book from the shortlist? This will be followed by a reel of the books in the early years category, leading into a panel discussion moderated by Sneha Verma, co-founder, Neev Literature Fest, with the authors shortlisted in the category.
Book award means to me like you get awards when you really do something good, or someone appreciates your work or your books or your hard work which you did. I like Tata's Pumpkin from the shortlisted book because they all collaborated and each one had a role to play, and the little girl was so kind, giving each piece to everyone, and so kindly she gave. And they all collaborated and made it.
Hello. Thank you all for tuning in after an enlightening session with none other than Mr. Ruskin Bond. It was so delightful to hear him speak, and I was just thinking I could spend all day sitting at his feet listening to all his stories. Really, the last 45 minutes just didn't do justice to what else we could have got out of him with a lifetime of experience and all the writing that he's done. But we have very little time now, so we're going to dive straight into our early years category. And I'd like to invite Miss Lalita Iyer, who is the author of Tata's Pumpkin. Hi, Lalita.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. We have Miss Vinita, who's the author of Amu and the Sparrows. Hi, Vinita. Hi, good. Miss Lavanya Karthik, the author of Cat Come Back. Hey, Lavanya.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Happy to be here.
Hi. We have Mr. C.G. Salamander, who's the author of Moo Done It. Hi, C.G.
Hi.
Should I call you C.G.?
You can call me CG.
All right. And we have Sarah H. Paul, who's the author of Cat's Diwali. Hi, Sarah. Hi. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm sure all of you enjoyed the last session. It was absolutely wonderful. And there's so many little things, little nuggets of information that I'm sure the authors would love to take away, like making lists, for example, and observing little things, reading so much, etc. But because we are running short of time, we'll go straight into question one. And I'd like all of you to answer this. What is it being an author for little children, especially the youngest ones who are probably just starting the habit of reading? Do you make an effort to understand your target audience, or do you go back and dive into your own childhood? Do you fill in the gaps and tell stories that you think need to be told because those are the missing links, things that they may not have been exposed to before? I mean, what are you hoping to, or what is your approach when you write for little children? So shall we start with Lalita then?
Hi. So I think it's super intimidating to write for little children. And Tata's Pumpkin was my first attempt. And I'm still figuring it out because I mean, I don't think I have gone through so many drafts of any book as I have with Tata's Pumpkin, because there is so much, economy of language and the balance of the words and pictures and this thing called show don't tell, which we keep talking about, but when it actually comes to practice, as writers, we are so used to our verbal diarrhea. We want to put everything out there, but then we have to hold back. So the restraint that is necessary in writing picture books, for me at least, it was like a huge exercise and a huge learning experience. And I hope to do more, and I hope to figure out the strategy of how all this works, because I'm still a newbie in this, and I hope I've got something right with the first one.
So does there have to be a strategy, Vanita? What do you think?
I think that you can't write without putting yourself in the place of your target audience. So if you're writing for really young kids, you have to think from their perspective. And I think, yeah, it's really important to be there and to tell stories of beauty for young children, leave them with some kind of lens to look at things, and also a way to show them the world. Not show anything actually, but just turn the lens and also talk about, leave them with a feeling of hope.
Right. In some ways fill in the gaps, the missing gaps, right?
Yeah.
Lavanya, what is it for you? Do you sort of go back to your own childhood? Or what is it?
Yeah, actually, yes, I do. I have to say that you really write for the child within you, and the child that you once were. You try to go back and remember what it felt like to be 5 or 6, and dealing with what then felt like monumental problems. Something as small as trying to make a friend, or trying to get across a busy street, or just as in the case of my book, finding a cat that you kind of frightened away perhaps, and you begin the journey with a lot of anger, and through the course of the book, which is essentially a very it's humorous verse, but you also, if you look carefully, you realize that what the child is going on is this arc from anger to regret, going back to feeling a more mellow mood, and when she finally reaches the end of the book, she is in a small way a different person. And I think these are all journeys that mean a lot to each one of us, but I think when you're a child, all of this is amplified much more, and each book is just is an attempt to capture that feeling.
Right. That's a nice thought, actually, to amplify what is really going on inside your head, and to be able to let that imagination fly. So yeah, CG, over to you. What is your opinion on this? Why firstly do you write for children, for little children, and what was your experience writing your book?
I actually write across all ages, and my experience is very close to Lavanya's. I think what's worked for me is to sort of craft characters that are interesting, and to make just a fun, interesting book that kids can kind of follow along to, because the thing that I'm scared about most, or most conscious about, is their interest level dropping, and that's always a priority when I write for this age group. Apart from that, it's try to put in as much representation or build a world around the book which kind of resonates with a child of that age, and that's pretty much it, honestly.
Okay, Sarah, over to you.
I think I don't think I mean, of course, going back into your own childhood is it's a great tool. It's a great mechanism to to get inspired. But I think I really don't put I didn't put so much thought into writing for a child, and I just feel like they're just littler versions of us, and they have the same problems that we do. They sort of want to connect with the world around us the same way we do, and they just have fewer tools too. So I think the key is not to sort of dumb it down and write for kids because they're kids. I think just sort of going with the flow. To be honest, I wrote this story to sort of just bring a little bit of awareness about the environment for my husband. And it happened to be then to make a good children's story. So I really think there's no science or formula to write for children, but yeah, I mean, whatever inspires you. It's great to go back to, your own childhood from time to time.
So this year on the shortlist for early years, we have 2 books about cats, which is very interesting because cats are obviously also very popular on the internet. We have one sort of detective story. We have 2 about relationships and one about sharing and community. So, I mean, if you look at the kind of books that that authors are now choosing to write, do you think that because the times have changed so much and continue to change very rapidly, actually, that is it important to give little children a fare of, possibly different kinds of topics that they haven't been exposed to? We have a book this time on parenting. We have one which implies, divorce. We have so much about identity, gender. We have now women, children, girl children who are mainly protagonists in a lot of books, which was probably not the case earlier. Talking about race, disparity. So all of that, do you think it's important to bring it into books very early on? Is that something that I'd like to hear what each of you feel about that? Anyone can take this question. Anyone wants to jump in? CG, go for it.
Yeah, I can go for it. I have very mixed opinions about this. On the one side, I think books that are overly didactic kind of defeats the purpose and may put a child off reading. So the answer is yes to your question, provided that the book can kind of stand on its own legs and it's going back to it being a fun, nice read that the kid kind of would not drop down. It's just that. Everything else is just layering.
Yeah, I agree with CG. I think a layer, something more nuanced, is what makes all the difference. I think with we have so many books that are trying to be woke and trying to sort of talk about topics because they're topical. But I think it's important to not wade into them like head on. Just probably talk about them in a way that that doesn't lose the child's interest. I feel like humor is a great way to do that. Verse is also always great because there's rhythm and there's it's fun to you're learning about, well, not learning, but you're thinking about these things without actually really having to think or taking it's not, you're not really banging the message on the head. So that's what I.
Do you have something to say?
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Lalita.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think if this whole riding the wave or riding the trend thing does not really work when it comes to children or actually anybody, because I think when you write from an authentic place and you write about something that you care about or that moves you or that you are invested in, that always makes, because ultimately you are the reader of your book, right? You write mainly for yourself, and then if it strikes a chord with other people, I mean, if you are happy with what you've written, it's likely that somebody else may be happy too. So I mean, it's really funny that with Tata's Pumpkin, I was actually trying to tell the story of my father, who was a farmer and who used to grow stuff in a farm in Jadchapur, and he came home just before the pandemic. I mean, we had to force him to come back because we suspected that it's going to be bigger than whatever. And the thing is, by the time the book came out, the timing was so surreal because it was actually the time when people were recognizing communities around them. They were talking to their neighbors, they were sharing food, they were doing all these things that we used to do as children, where we didn't have to organize play dates to go to a neighbor's house, where we made extra sambar and we had someone to give to, or we something came home to us all the time. So it was actually very weird that it played out like that, but it was never the intention to write a book about community, or to write a book about sharing and all the things that it's now sort of portrayed as. But the idea was just to write about someone who grows stuff, and who there's always ample produce, and what better thing to do than to share it with your neighbors. That is all where it started, and that's what used to be our preoccupation most of the time, when Appa used to come home laden with vegetables, and the pumpkins were always the toughest thing to because there was so much of it, and we didn't know what to do. So
Yeah, I think sometimes as adults we sort of over strategize and overthink things, but when it comes straight from your heart, it always resonates and always finds an audience. And I think that's the beauty about all the books that you've written. So my next question really is, the magic of the early years books and all of the books that you guys have written is that apart from the writing, the illustration are just so spectacular. And now in Indian literature, especially for children, we have such amazing illustrators across the board. So how is this collaboration? I mean, I know that all of you are writers who have collaborated with illustrators to bring life to your books. And I think they are so much a part of what you brought out. So how does that work? I mean, what kind of collaboration, time spent, how much of your thinking do you share, and are you finally happy with what you come out with? What is that process really? Lavanya, let's go with you.
Actually, I have to say that the most successful books are almost never collaborations. I mean, your job, especially with a picture book, your job as a writer is to get out of the way. You put your words down, but it is the illustrator who then steps up and adds all those extra layers. Because with a picture book, it's really the pictures telling the story. It's the illustrations that are center. And the words, in fact, in the most successful picture books, you don't notice the words. So essentially, it is almost never a collaboration. It is the illustrator is is a partner in the process.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about how this is publishing's best kept secret, that sometimes writers and illustrators don't even meet each other until, for example, a book is empaneled for an award or something like that, and they have to be a joint. But this is what I used to believe happens, and I was surprised that this is not how it works, that a writer and an illustrator almost never ever collaborate. In fact, many times, most publishers don't even tell you who is illustrating their book, and they believe that that is for the best of the book, because it is for the illustrator to give vision to your words in a manner that really uplifts it, and it sort of takes it to another level. So if as a writer you come in the way, like Lavanya described, and suppose you have inputs like Tata looks like this, I believe Tia is like that, and I believe this society complex has, something like this, and there is, Tia has a cat, and or whatever it is. You are actually creating, already creating a lot of constraints for the canvas that is available to an illustrator. So, in an ideal publishing world, a writer finishes writing, the story is edited to its best possible word count, and then the writer steps back and it's the illustrator who takes over. So the whole process is which is why picture books take really long to make, because the writing goes on for a few months or maybe almost a year, and the illustration takes the same amount of time, actually a little more. And then you see your work being in its final product. It's a lovely surprise, because when I looked at the cover and the pictures in my book, and I was like, oh my God, I never thought Tia would be this, or I didn't think Tata would look like that. And it's a joy. I mean, even though you have a preconceived notion of what your book will look like, it's always a joy to see it as something else. And I mean, I had such a fabulous, gift in having a Proiti Roy to do my book. So it was such a joy.
Such an incredible insight. I mean, one never would have thought that that's how it works, because it feels like such a perfect collaboration. I mean, all of the illustrations look like they're just made for, or even entirely designed by the author in some way, because it feels like it's their mind's eye. Is that the same experience you've had, Sarah?
Yeah, for sure. It's like a marriage, we have a slightly more collaborative process in the sense that we when Urvashi and I worked together on this book, it was more of we worked on a character, on the cat, to see whether we went through a lot of iterations, and until we narrowed down on the final shape and the character that we liked. And then, it was entirely her show, in the sense that, she went with it. She adds, I think the illustrator adds a lot of their own elements and their own essence to the book, which is what ties the whole thing together really beautifully.
Right. So yeah, I mean, unless anyone else has a question, anything to say about Anita?
I wanted to say something, yes. I was just thinking that the second question is something I wanted to answer actually, about, what kind of subjects do we take and how should we take it for a very young child? And I think I think the weariness of having, like C.G. Salamander said, something didactic, and stories should be happier places to be for very young kids. I also think that we come from a space of privilege. And I think often we don't realize that stories are safer space to peer from the outside for a child, and to look into and connect to the inner world of another place. And I think, therefore, these difficult stories or subjects are nice ways to do it, even for a very young child. That's what I want to jump in and say.
In fact, the feel I got when I read your book, Vinita, was, just as a child, I would be so curious and ask 100 questions about why and what, and, is there a reason that the author thought that way? Is it, I mean, you want to tell us a little more about Amu and the Sparrows and what was really going on? You left so much hanging, but it made me so curious to think what was going on in your mind. So yeah, maybe a little light on that.
I actually wrote Amu and the Sparrows about a boy living with his grandmother, waiting for sparrows that don't come anymore. He was feeding us the sparrows, and that is the layer I want to be available for a child who wants a happy story. The other layer is about the wordless grief children have at a very young age if there is trouble at home, and how there aren't words for that, and how the child uses the sparrow metaphor, because there is for a child it's not metaphoric actually, but uses that to latch on to and hope that his parents will be back together. And I wanted to leave that story that way only, because if there a layer very deep inside available if there is difficulty in processing grief for a child, and also the top layer, which is just a story of a child with his grandmother waiting for two sparrows to come back.
True. That's so beautifully told, actually. Just so evocative. And yeah, thank you for that book. It's just incredible. So yeah, Lavanya with Cat Come Back. It's really a book about imagination, because she goes on this little trip and she goes everywhere. Do you want to tell us how you used intrigue or imagination or curiosity to sort of weave that whole story through? And then finally, I love the way it ends. When she comes back home, she's like, oh, okay, this is, after all of that, here's a cat right on my chair. So yeah, you want to tell us a little more about that?
Sure. In fact, this book started off, it wasn't a visual book at all. It was a tactile book. Because the very first version of this book was a tactile book for visually challenged children to be able to read. So that's where the accordion format began. And it was essentially a story about a child, again, chasing a cat. And the point of the tactile book was the various textures and forms that you could use your fingers to feel out in the course of reading the book. But that has translated into a very different experience. And when it became a more conventional book with words, the adventures your fingers were supposed to have on the page just got translated to the imagination. So there is this wild and wacky adventure that they may or may not have gone on. And it just becomes this visual exploration that the illustrators, Ishan and Aisha, have just totally, they just done a brilliant job with visualizing that aspect of the book.
Is beautifully illustrated. So do you ever go back to the book and feel like, oh, I wish I'd added this, something else to that story? Do you ever feel like that?
We should have, no, just for the joy of the illustrations, for extra pages. Yes, we should have.
Yeah. I think artists are never fully satisfied with what they put out, right? It's always a little inkling that maybe I could have changed a little something here or something there to make it that much better.
I think in terms of the text, I'm quite happy with it. But yes, I think just the joy of seeing more and more of those pages unfold would have been quite tempting.
Yeah, the accordion format is just brilliant. It just, gives you a different dimension to reading totally. So yeah, thank you for that. So CG, I'm going to ask you, with Mood on It, it's a amazing detective book for a young child. Great. Also, in terms of setting and where you've set it is so important because it gives you a very different landscape and imagery. Just featuring different kinds of people from an urban audience. So is there anything that also about like how authority can make change? How there are people in...
You need anything? No. Right? They finish eating, wash off.
There's some audio leak that's happened. Thank you. Yeah. No, so I was just thinking that when you sort of pursue something and you try and influence change, that the role of authority in that setup who come in to enable that change, right? In your case, you had the mayor. Are there any thoughts on how, and firstly, the detective format and why you chose to bring in the mayor and what is that story about?
Okay, so but I think I'm going to try and break this into two parts. And I'm going to kind of come out with a declaration that Mood on It is one of those books where I did very little work. So the idea was in my head for quite some time, and then Shayoni had reached out, and it felt like this is exactly what Shayoni wanted. So I sent it across, and everything else, I'm going to say about 60 to 70% of the work was all Aindri. Because if you go through the book, what you will find are the pictures kind of have its own element of mystery to it. And that's primarily because of how Aindri went about designing the book. And she has used fruits to kind of build into the illustration. So you will slowly find that the characters, Amu's hair are made out of leaves and the wheels of a cart are made out of old orange peels. But coming back to the format, I think mysteries is something I've been writing across all ages, and I kind of just wanted to distill it down and keep distilling it down. So I think I also have one for a slightly higher age group coming up soon, and I'm working on a adult novel, and I think I just wanted to try and encapsulate the genre that is mystery and kind of just make it available for a young audience, and I hope I've done that. I feel I have. But
yeah,
yes,
I think
thank you.
Absolutely have. It's a delightful little detective novel.
Just to address the role of authority, that was completely, I did not put any thought into it at all, to be completely candid. It just sort of happened, I guess. So
okay. Well, he does play a big role there. He's sort of the catalyst for change finally. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think we have very much time left, but I'm going to go to Sarah. So Cat's Diwali is, of course, another book about, it's a cat story again, but very, very lovely because, there's so much about our worlds and how selfish we've become that we almost entirely forget what animals are put through. And it's lovely, Sarah, that you've sort of made us, see things with empathy. And perspective is very, very important there. And especially children, I think, naturally sort of understand these things, but as adults, we're so engrossed with our own worlds that we miss out on the little nuances. So do you want to tell us about what, I mean, you said you wrote it for your husband, but you can tell us a little more about your book.
Yeah, of course. It's it's a story about of course, empathy is one of the main takeaways, but I think also it's about grassroots activism in a way, just sort of we're also so, like you said, so caught up with, we tend to complain about the world around us, but I think one of the key takeaways is letting children know that if there's something you don't like, you can change it. So I think through the story, the cat's sort of bothered by the firecrackers and the noise, and it's also letting them know that we live in this world, and we with other creatures as well, who through our human celebrations we tend to forget about. For those, like you said, when children are already so empathetic at that age, it also kind of brings to light how if you don't like something, how you can the cat sort of writes a note, a letter to the mayor, to take things into her own hands. And I think that's I think that's something interesting for children to see, because we've got some pretty funny responses and some great, like when we did readings with these kids, it was great to see what kind of what things they would like to change around them in their environments. So that was fun to see. And I hope kids enjoy and really take something away from this story.
Nice. I think activism is a good thing to introduce to them when they're young, so that they can start taking up so many other things that they can possibly fight in this world and make big changes. Thank you, all of you, for this really enlightening session. We're going to move to the Q&A. But before that, also a big congratulations for being on the shortlist. And I hope, it doesn't matter who the winner is, because I think they're all brilliantly written books and deserve a big award anyway. So thank you. And I think, Kartika, over to you, or anybody else from Neev who will take on the Q&A session.
Hello, everyone. I'm Janvi. Thank you, Sneha, and thank you, everyone, for this wonderful panel discussion. I know we're absolutely out of time, but there is one question and sort of a comment that I do want to share with all of you, which has come from Rahman Ramzan, who said, I want to ask that from where you get such good content that is so inspiring to all children? Where does it all come from? I think it's also a comment and is also a question together, and it's a nice way to anyone can answer this, and we would end this panel with it so that we move seamlessly to the next one.
I think you just keep talking to each other, and you keep listening to your own voices, and you observe and you eavesdrop when other people are saying something, and you make notes, lots of notes.
I think you look around all the time, you're looking at books, like Ruskin Bond just said earlier, you can't be a writer unless you're a reader. So you're reading and you're picking things up, and you take stories from things around our lives, inside our lives, outside, right outside our lives also.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll now move into our next panel, which will be just introduced by Ronak. Thank you all. And I look forward to the award ceremony.
While most of us have learned to read by the ages of 5 or 6, it is between the years of 6 and 9 that the real challenge takes place of mastering some 100 phonic rules, learning to recognize 3,000 words with just a glance, and develop a comfortable reading speed approaching 100 words a minute. One must learn to combine the words on the page with half a dozen squiggles called punctuation into something, a voice or image in the mind that leads to the formation of meaning. Had someone told me in the first grade that I had to do all of this, I most certainly would have burst into tears. But honestly, it wasn't much of a challenge. Not much for talking to other people or the sun. Most days I would cover with fear at the thought of going out to play and would make the lame excuse of have hurt my finger or some other ache somewhere in the body and sit in the comfort of my classroom. At this time, without much to do, I was either found reading a book or coloring on a page. Generally, I found ideas to be transferring from one to the other. Now, I am beyond grateful for having read at that formative period in my life, because I can say now, with clarity, that those books got me through so much, from being bullied and not having many friends to sparking confidence in me. But most importantly, setting a foundation for being a lifelong learner. Unfortunately, however, I have no recollection whatsoever of having ever read a story by an Indian author or set in India. I just didn't come across them. The 4 books in this category of emerging readers are the most pleasant culmination of diversity and togetherness in a variety of settings, rural and urban. I, at 16, found the books to be ingeniously honest, so I cannot imagine what the children the books are aimed at would think of them. In the words of Kate DiCamillo, I hope that the books are as much a gift for you as they were for me. Next, we have a student from the PYP sharing her excitement about the books on the shortlist. This will be followed by a montage of the books in the emerging readers category before the panel discussion, moderated by Ms. Karthika Gopalkrishnan, head of reading at Neev, with the authors shortlisted in this segment before the authors segment begins. Thank you.
I love NBA Neev Book Award because it features reading levels for all ages. Like the books over there, you can read at any age, from maybe 2 to 14. So that's one thing. And even the Cat Diwali, the books are so nice and they're so friendly with all kind of kids.
Thank you, Ronak and Daisha, for sharing your thoughts about the books on the shortlist. For those of you who've just joined us, my name is Karthika. I love to read. I'm here today because I'm going to be moderating the panel discussion with the authors shortlisted in the emerging readers category. Before we dive into the panel, there are a few housekeeping rules that I'd like to share with the audience. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. Do specify if you want a particular panelist to answer a particular question. As this is a webinar, if you do raise your virtual hand, we won't be able to call on you. So all questions in the Q&A box. The detailed bios of the panelists will be put up in the chat box, but here's a brief introduction of the wonderful books and the creators shortlisted for the Neev Book Award 2021 in the Emerging Readers category. We have a mix of books this year, which delve into different threads that make up the fabric of childhood. Irrepressible curiosity, forging and deepening bonds of friendship by banding together to beat the odds, as well as seeing yourself and the world around us with fresh eyes. Today, we are joined by the award-winning children's author, Nandini Nair, who is shortlisted for her book, Minnie's Questions, about a little girl who engages keenly with the people and places around her. Welcome, Nandini.
Hi, Karthika. Good to be here.
Lovely to see you. We have the infectiously enthusiastic Harshika Udasi, shortlisted for Friends Behind Walls, which tells the story of Innu and Putti and how their friendship persists despite their families being at loggerheads and the unexpected discoveries that are unearthed as they navigate through the situation. Welcome, Harshika.
Thank you for having me here, Karthika. Happy to be here with you.
Lovely to see you. The ever-thoughtful writer, Arefa Tehsi, shortlisted for the book The Chirmi Chasers, joins us next. It's incredible how many layers Arefa's managed to pack into this slim book. There's overcoming prejudice, there's celebrating the underdog, while shining a spotlight on a quintessentially indigenous community and sport. Thank you for joining us, Arefa.
Thank you, Karthika. Thank you for having me here.
Lovely to see you. Serving up strong slices of nostalgia with her depictions of vintage clocks and the quaint little pockets of India that come alive in its thriving bylanes, Varsha Session is bound to make her readers smile with the Clockwala's clues. It tells the story of two 8-year-old girls who have to solve a puzzle before time runs out. Welcome, Varsha.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Good to see you. And fueled by her own love for nature and the inspiring work done by an organization in her local community, turning a city park into an urban organic farm, Nandita Dakuna joins us with her story of external and internal transformation that takes place in her central character Zara's world in The Miracle on Sundarbag Street. We're glad you could join us, Nandita.
Hi, Kartika. Lovely to be here.
Hi, good to see you. It's so nice to see all of you here together because I know all of you through your books. So I'll get started with my first question because when I viewed all your books together as a common thread, I saw that there is a point in each of them where the boundaries between age and class blur between different characters. Was this something that you did seriously, consciously? If so, why did you go about this? Maybe we could get Varsha to go first, reverse alphabetical order.
Thank you, sure. So for me, yes, it was conscious, but it was also unconscious in so many ways because I don't think children really see age the way grown-ups do. I mean, for example, I conduct book clubs and sometimes children being children ask me, how old are you? And I often ask them, how old do you think I am? And they say, I think you're really old. You might be 12. And there are other children who say, I think you may be old and you might be 102. And I think both of these ideas are quintessentially childlike. And that's why I would say age blurs in any books that I would like to write for children.
That's lovely. Thanks so much, Varsha, for sharing that. And such a question that you get, right, when you interact with kids a lot. Thanks so much. Nandita, what do you think about this?
No, Karthik, I think it's very critical, of course, to have diversity in our children's books today, be it, across ages or like I mentioned. But I think when it works strongest is when diversity is not necessarily at the center stage of the book or the point, the theme of the book really, but it's there. It might be there visually. It might just come together in the background. But if the story is really a slice of normal life, then where the book scores is when children see similarities really in all the characters, despite the sort of subtle diversity or perhaps reading about unfamiliar or other categories and segments and localities. But it's when they see the similarities between their lives and those stories that they can connect beautifully and that they realize that we're different, but in so many ways we're the same. That's when it becomes even more powerful. And that's the way it was at Sundarbag Street, really. I don't think I set out to write a book about how different people came together. I mean, that wasn't really the intent, but so many of my discussions now when I do book readings or sessions, do come, children do talk about this, about how people across ages were working together in that garden and so on. So it's there at the back of the mind, yeah.
That's lovely. And what you just said, Nandita, reminded me of this other book that I read called Seed Folks by Paul Fleischman, which is a bunch of a child plants a seed in an alley. And there are people from different nationalities who come in to grow it, nurture it for their own specific purposes and reasons and their own history. So thank you for raising that. Thank you so much. Nandini, what do you think about this, about the boundaries and the blurring of age and class in books?
So I think if it is a consciously thought out decision, it shows in the book. So I think for me, it has to come organically. It's not something planned. And in my case, with Minnie's Questions is part of a series. So it's the second book. And in the first book, you did have somebody who's looking after this little girl. And then it very, very organically, it came on to the next one. And so the boundaries that you were talking about are like I said, very organically and very naturally crossed, because I brought in characters from that world also. So I think that in any book that sets out with the intention of doing this, making it a book which is about differences, which look the same, I think that it kind of shows, the effort shows, and it has to be done very naturally, and it has to be central to the story for it to convince the reader, but primarily to convince the author also.
Oh, fair enough. Thanks, Nandini. Yeah. And also, it also ties in and speaks to what Nandita had just said about how it needs to come into the background and not really be forced into it.
Yes. Yes.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. Harshika, what do you think?
So did you notice, Kartika, all of us said the same thing essentially, and you notice that this common thread runs through our books. And it has happened because I suppose all of us present here are looking at things around us and are including that in our book. And which is why when we see that the youngest ones, if they are connecting with the oldest one in our community, then it will definitely reflect in the book. And if there is that thing about class when we speak, people may not, children may not notice it when they are interacting with others, but when it comes to in a book, and it's of course like Nandini also said, it's organically done. Then they realize, oh yeah, you know what? My gardener also speaks like this all the time because we keeping on telling him the same thing. We complain about the same thing, but this is his answer all the time. So these are things that happen, and then children notice it, and then they realize, okay, fine. I suppose we need to make a change, this change or that change, and then that leads, of course, to how books are bringing about a change. But when spoken about these lines blurring, it's because I think all of us are just aware of what we are writing nowadays and are making it a little more relatable because we want children to get acquainted with their surroundings eventually, right? That's what at least I see in the writings around me right now.
That's true, Ashkan. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think also it just goes towards getting any reader who picks up these books to sort of develop a sense of open-mindedness and not be less closed. But thank you so much for that. Arefa, you've been really patient and listened to everyone. What do you think about this?
Pleasure listening to everyone. First of all, I would like to say that I loved what Disha, the student, said in the beginning. Her enthusiasm is infectious, and I think we all will agree that that's the biggest reward for any writer, to hear a reader speak like that. And as far as the consciousness is concerned, I am actually not at all conscious of what I'm writing, where I'm basing my stories and what I'm writing about. I think I just dig into my compost heap that has been enriched over the years through various visits to forests and tribal villages and small towns with my naturalist father. In fact, when I was growing up, me and Sadat, my brother, two of our best buddies were Noski and Birma, who were both Bhil tribals. And I remember many an afternoon, hanging from maybe a falsa tree with them or a guava tree with them. So when I started writing, the settings started to come naturally to me. And I think it does, with most of the writers. But what I do consciously sometimes think about when I write is, not stereotyping characters or communities or regions.
Absolutely. I thought it was really refreshing to see a Bhil tribal boy and his unconventional father in your book. So I really enjoyed reading it. I'm so glad Daisha enjoyed it as well. In her full video, which was not edited, she said, it was so good. I learned so much. She really had a lot of fun with it.
Very hard to believe that.
Thanks so much for that first round of questions. And now, because we're on a tight timeline, I'm going to do a rapid fire round with each of you, where you'll have about 10-20 seconds to come up with an answer for a question that I ask you. This time we'll go in alphabetical order and start with Arefa. So Arefa, if you had to write another book around another regional sport, which sport would you choose and why?
Actually, I have already written another story on sports, on a regional sport. In fact, it is based in Kashmir, in the Kargil Valley of Kashmir, and it is on archery, dafangs, as they call it. So if I have to write something else on another regional sport, maybe it would be on camel riding in Rajasthan or Jallikattu, who knows?
Nice. We can't wait to read it. We're sure that will be as engrossing as the Chirmi Chasers. Thanks, Arefa, for that. Okay, Harshika, you ready? Okay, you're muted, but we're guessing you're biting.
Sorry, biting nails, but ready. Yeah, that's what I said.
Sure. Harshika, what is the most interesting feedback that you've received about Friends Behind Walls?
Okay, the most interesting feedback's got to be about Tekrichi Mhatari, okay, that lady in the book. So most people cannot pronounce her name because, of course, I've kept it Marathi. So they say, but this Tekrichi Mhatari, is she real? And I always tell them, I don't know whether she's real or not, but I keep seeing visions of her everywhere. And maybe you have a Tekrichi Mhatari in your life. Have you seen her? have you seen this Tekrichi Matari? And they're like really thrilled. And then they say, yes, 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 I have seen this one and I have seen that one and looks exactly like this.
Nice, nice. Thanks so much for sharing that, Harshika. Nandini, are you ready for your question?
Yeah, sure.
So we just wanted to ask you what's next in store for Mini in the Mini series? I think Nandini's frozen.
Oh, yes.
There, Nandini. Can you hear us?
Yeah. So yeah, I heard your question. You said what was next in store for Mini. So yes, I do have a lot of ideas, but it depends on a whole lot of factors. Like Mini herself has lots of ideas on what she wants to do. So time will tell. I mean, the third book is actually out, so I can say it's about her books. She discovers a set of books which are about big little monsters, and she falls in love with them, and she wants to live like them. So that's what is there. But I hope there'll be more.
Nice. Thanks, Nandini.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to reading Mini's books as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nandita, you've explored your love for nature in The Miracle on Sundarbag Street. We also know that you love music as well. Will you be developing more books around your love for music?
That's a very easy question because the current work in progress is really based around music at the core of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right from the time of old record players coming down. I won't say any more now.
How nice. I'm so glad that we were able to divine this and ask you this question. Thanks, Nandita. Good luck with that. We can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Varsha, a question for you. If there are other vintage collectibles that you like enough that you want to make them the centerpiece of your work, apart from vintage clocks, what would they be?
Probably cars. Cars, I think, are quite fascinating as well, but I know that would require a lot more research because I don't know so much about cars, but I think vintage cars are really cool. So I would love to do a book on cars.
Lovely. Okay. Sounds great. Can't wait to read it if it happens. Now, I want to ask all of you a question that's open, and any of you feel like answering, feel free to jump in. I want to ask you a question about how do you think characters in children's books in this age group prompt readers to emulate a sense of agency? And do you feel like this might be aligned with the nature of these books themselves, where emerging readers are essentially transition books, where children are trying to transition from picture books to more complex picture books, or picture books to chapter books? So do you feel like this might be an interesting characteristic for these books to be imbued with?
Yeah, I think yes, definitely, because we are also talking about, going by the age group, we are talking about a child who's just discovering the world for herself or himself. So definitely, I think they would have agency, they would have curiosity, they would have the eagerness to try out things on their own. So yes, I think that would be an integral part of stories for this particular age group.
Thanks so much, Nandini. Harshika?
If I may add.
Yeah, so what I'm saying, I'm so sorry, Nandita. Let Nandita go first. Okay, I'll go first, fine. So when I was writing this book, Friends Behind Walls, there was this one little place where the children have to step out on their own to discover this lady called Tekrichi Matari and know the story. And I kept on thinking, do you think I should put them out on their own? Should I put them out on their own? Then I said, hey, no, it's a children's book. The children have to take their decisions. They have to explore their world. So my sense of agency, yes, there is that control that comes in. They did go out eventually in the book. And they did do their own, they led the story. So yes, definitely, Karthika.
Thank you for that, Harshika. Go ahead, Nandita.
In fact, I'm reiterating what Harshika said, because in those Sundarbag at one level is about a whole community that comes together, and really the change happens because of that, and it doesn't happen overnight. But the whole fact that it was instigated, that it started off because of the idea of 9-year-old Zara and her persistence in starting that, that's something that children do take away from and find hopefully inspiring. That's where the agency inspires.
Nice, thank you. I think we'll have audience questions coming in just a bit.
I would like to say, to add to what everyone said here, is that today the children, especially in India, in the middle classes, they are growing in a very protected environment. We are very concerned about hygiene. We don't walk to school. We either take a private car or a bus to go to school. So where does the exposure come from? So we need these books, in the absence of this exposure, we need these books to connect children, to these issues. Because when I was growing up, the only Chaudhary I knew wore a safa and he was a chacha. And we all, of course, loved all the heroes without flaws that we had. But today you have, heroes with flaws. You have kids with disabilities. Kid 2 is very mad day. You have, we are talking about grandparents with Alzheimer's. We are talking about parents who are gay. We are talking about pellet injuries in Kashmir. We are talking about, the Sikh community during emergency. So, it's the writing for children in India has grown incredibly rich. And as far as the transition is concerned, I would like to tell you my story of transition. It of course happened at a higher level of reading, but I think I must tell you this. So in my 9th grade, my brother Himalay, he gifted me Wuthering Heights. It took me some time to figure out the meaning of wuthering. So after I figured it out, I started reading it. And it took me hours to read the first few pages because I could not figure the relationships in that. I just couldn't get my head around it. And then I had my eureka moment. And I was like, okay, cousins marry in that society. So, that was my moment of revelation. And after that, I left all my Mills and Boons and Enid Blytons behind, and I started devouring Russian classics and Hindi classics and English classics. So that was, my moment of transition. And I think the kids who are graduating from picture books to chapter books would be feeling something similar.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Arefa. For sharing your own story of transition, along with everybody else's thoughts on that question. Thanks so much, everyone, for that. We have Sneha, who's joining us from the NLF team with questions from the audience. So Sneha, over to you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Ms. Karthika, for this delightful discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience did too. So I have some audience questions for all of you. Taking forward what all of you spoke about regionality and diversity and exposure, how important do you think it is for all of us to include bilingual books for emerging readers that help them make more meaningful collections between their identity, language, and any other culture or language? This question is open to all the panelists.
May I? So I think it's important. I really think it's important, and particularly because I conduct several writing programs where children typically write about Laura and William and James and all the others. And when you question them closely about why they do this, it's because so some of them who have an answer say that it's very unlikely that I'd go to a shop and speak to them in English. And this is a valid point. If you go to a small shop, I'm not going to go there and speak to them in English. So in a sense, what they're trying to do is make their story believable. But what is happening is that it's becoming a lot more unbelievable. And I think that, especially considering we come from such a multilingual society, I think bilingual can even be taken a lot further, where you don't necessarily have the same text in multiple languages, but you mix texts, because really that is how we speak. And I think that would be something that the future of publishing in India could head towards.
Nice. And that's a good hat note to all the publishers in the audience. Harshika wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just said, when I read my books with children, and, I usually put in, like in Kitu, I had Gujarati words come in, and in Friends Behind Walls, I have Marathi words come in. So children are like, for a moment, they're like, but is this an English word really? Because it's not italicized. So I tell them that no, it's like when you're reading another English book and you see a French word, for example, what do? Well, we usually just use Google, or we ask somebody around us what it means and things like that. So I said, just go ahead and ask what this means. And we'll be happy to tell you what it means. Otherwise, maybe you know somebody who speaks Marathi. Go approach that neighbor, approach that friend, and let's just go and make it a more, inclusive kind of a reading session. And then they did that for, there's an entire poem in Marathi. And then one small kid called up her Masi, who stays somewhere here in Marathi, in Mumbai, and knows a bit of Marathi. And she spoke it, sort of read it out to her. And it was such a fabulous, they had such a great reading over the phone. So I suppose we must do that. And Varsha, you're absolutely right. Publishers should come ahead and encourage, if we have other words from other languages included, we must absolutely do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of Tulika's word bird books that they do so well.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I cannot pass on more questions. Over to you, Ms. Kartika.
Thank you so much, Ms. Neha. And thank you so much to all our panelists for being here today. I had such a fun time. I hope you did too. I hope you do stay on for the awards announcement, and I wish you all the very best for the awards today. Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. We'll move on to the next segment of the event, and I will hand it over to Mihika.
In today's dynamic and ever-changing world, we are trained to be global thinkers, but often it is easy to get lost in the variety of media and literature that is available to us. When I was younger, I repeatedly read books about characters that were profoundly contrasting compared to me. The little girls and boys on paper would consistently be Caucasian, with the quintessential blonde hair and green eyes. From a young age, we're exposed to the global, especially the so-called Western world. The media that is presented to us plays a monumental role in the perception of culture. Growing up, when I only saw American and European children in my books, I was unintentionally and gradually disengaging from my roots and foundations, my Indian culture. This is why it is so consequential for us to appreciate and be proud of the literature that is created by India. It is absolutely essential for young readers to find characters and settings that speak to them and create a robust bond between young readers and the people born on paper. Coming up is a video of a student from the MYP speaking about her impressions of the Neev Book Award. After this, we will watch a reel of the books from the Junior Readers category that will headline the panel discussion moderated by Rasil Kaur Ahuja, co-founder, Neev Literature Festival, with the authors shortlisted in this category.
I'm going to be talking about how the Neev Book Awards are relevant for me. These books impact not only me, but the whole Neev community, since they have many different categories. These books are also very engaging and interesting reads and cover many topics, such as friendship or freedom. I'm going
Thank you, Mihika and Sanvi, for this lovely introduction on the importance of middle grade fiction. A warm welcome to the audience. And as a reminder, we will not be responding to any raised hands, but we definitely want to hear from you. So please enter your comments and questions in the Q&A box, and our authors will address these during the live Q&A part of the segment. So, and also detailed author bios will be available to you on the chat. And now for our guests of honor, the fabulous writers whose books are on this year's Neev Book Award shortlist, Junior Reader shortlist: A.B. Majmudar, Anupam Arunachalam, Aparna Karthikeyan, Deepa Agarwal, Devika Karyappa, and Nandita Basu. Welcome, welcome. I must first thank each of you individually, because while the past 18 months promised to be a very dull and a very much stay-at-home year, your books were a delightful surprise and escape. And thank you for those epic adventures you took us on, because otherwise we would have been couch potatoes and more potatoes than couch. So shall we get into it? Great. Let me start off with my first question, and this is going to go to A.B., otherwise known as Ami, the author of the mythological fantasy, The Torchbearer, who joins us from the US, where the sun has just risen. Ami, looking at the mix of genres in this year's shortlist, what trends is it representative of within children's literature for this particular age group? What can you tell us?
Oh gosh, it's amazing to see what we've done with this category. So we've got these historical mythological themed books, and I think we authors have somehow made our way into the musty, dusty corners of old libraries and illuminated new perspectives and children's perspectives on timeless stories from the past. And I think the trend is the widening of universes that a child can inhabit through her imagination and her experience. So whether we're dining miner's lamps, chasing a diamond, finding a piano, traveling to Lhasa or Hastinapur, or searching for the nectar of immortal life, we're doing it with navigating by this constellation of stars in the child's imagination. And maybe it isn't even a trend. Maybe it's a characteristic of the best of children's literature to navigate the ocean of life with these starry skies of a child's world.
Thank you, Ami. You have definitely done your homework and read all the books on our short list. So someone else who's done a mythological retelling is with us, Anupam. Your book, The Young Pandavas, is actually a series of 3 so far.
Mm-hmm.
So what's trending these days in children's fiction, besides the beard, that is?
Thank you so much. In children's fiction, I think we're looking at, in Indian children's fiction, you see the literary landscape kind of reflecting the actual landscape more closely. Like, we have a long way to go, but we are getting more diverse stories. We're getting so many new stories that we never heard before. In our category, I guess the trend seems to be to kind of like look at the past, recontextualize it, and sort of like present it to children in an interesting way. And I think that's really, really great.
It's lovely. Thank you. And I think, there's where there's myth, there's also mystery, and there's fantasy. And what I've noticed, especially in this collection, is that even stones can be shrouded in myth and fantasy. And we learned that in the Adventures of the Kohinoor. So Devika, besides big bauble fashion, what are the trends in middle grade nonfiction these days?
I like the big bauble fashion. There seems to be a strong inclination to reach back into the past and make connections with the present. So whether they're issues or stories or themes, incidents, even very minor incidents that children can use to find meaning in their own, they find it relevant in their own lives. And when you think about history, it's a story of human development. So it's really not surprising that children are interested in the past. I always contend that they're naturally interested in the past. When you hear questions like, where have I come from? Have you always been here? They're trying to find their place in a story that began before they were born. I think that's why these kind of stories and these kind of perhaps fiction, non-fiction are more and more popular now, more and more available, more and more read.
Which is great, actually, right? Because in order to really understand where you're going, you kind of have to know where you've been. And that sets a context for everything. And I think more importantly right now, what I'm also looking at in terms of trends is that nonfiction need not be dense. It need not be a textbook. And we see this also in the adventurous journey to a forbidden city, right, Deepa? And as someone who's authored over 50 books, what's the trend you've noticed in nonfiction for young people?
Well, first of all, I noticed that there is a vast variety of topics, whether it's about space travel or careers or, the biographical stories, which have always been popular in nonfiction, or whether even it's the, information about the pandemic. There is a vast variety of books in nonfiction available and for all ages, not just for the age group we are looking at. And apart from that, the way these books are narrated, the style is much more child-friendly. The attempt is to engage the reader. And as Devika also said, make it relevant to their lives. And actually, the focus is on, the reading pleasure of the child, not communicating the facts as such. The facts are made very exciting. And apart from that, there is also, the presentation of the book, which I find are getting more and more exciting, that the way they're illustrated, designed, and this is bringing children very close to information books that are, as fun to read as fiction.
I would 100% agree with you. in terms of presentation, I think our books have really reached a critical stage. We are just doing a much better job in terms of offering them different types of texts in with illustrations, and not thinking that illustrations only belong for the younger age group. Actually, we all are visual learners in many ways. So it reinforces the text, in fact. So the one thing that I've also been seeing, and because we've all been, like I said, couch potatoes, watching lots of movies and lots of shows and documentaries, and these things that are inspired by true events just seem so much more compelling than, and I don't mean this, please don't take this badly or wrong way as someone who's written fiction, but they just seem very compelling in a way that it's relatable to the person who's watching. So No Nonsense Nandini is one of those. Aparna, by the way, I love the alliteration, No Nonsense Nandini. But tell us, what's a trend you see in fictionalizing real life situations and real life individuals?
Yeah, I think it's, we're in a very interesting juncture. We are actually talking about our own lifespans, through books for children, which they otherwise wouldn't, get access to. So we're talking about the great processes of our time. I mean, I think if, you look at the set that No Nonsense Nandini belongs to, the Pari Karadi collaboration, we have some very important stories, all of which we saw, burst into our national scene, so to speak, in the last couple of years. We've had the farmers' protest, which No Nonsense Nandini feeds into. We've had the migrants, walking back during the lockdown, which is, one of the stories. And then we've had, Coming Home, which is again about migrants. And we've had people with children with HIV, and we have people with disabilities. We have these everyday people and their lives, everyday heroes. We are celebrating their lives through fiction, fictionalizing their life stories, so to speak. I think that fictionalizing just gives you a little bit of creative license, because when you do it in a non-fiction way, you have certain limitations, which we sort of do as journalists when we are reporting something. But, for a child, you do want to kind of make certain things a little bit easier. Like, for example, in No Nonsense Nandini, her life it's really, really difficult. And, it's a sort of tragedies that come back to back, that you feel bad actually saying it, so you want to make the real a little softer, at least in a book, because you can't make her real life softer, but at least in a book, you want to present it a certain way. But that is a dilemma, right? I mean, are you saying that, somebody has survived that? So how do you actually tell a child that, listen, they've survived worse, but in this book, we are telling it to you in such a way that, they are able to cope with it, like bite-size, issues, so to speak. So I think this, when children do see these real life heroes, they're able to understand, when farmers protest or gather in, the outskirts of Delhi, or when they see a newspaper headline or they see something in the news, they actually understand what's happening in the world around them. And I think that's a great starting point for them to actually reach out to their own, contemporaries who may not be from the same class, background as they are.
True. It gives them some context to events surrounding them today. And also, it doesn't have to be tomorrow that they're exposed to an article in the newspaper and they say, okay, I relate that to something. It can happen years down the road.
Correct.
And that's really our goal here. It's not about today and today's reading. It's your lifelong journey that these help you on. I'm going to talk about another trend that I know definitely people everywhere are talking about, graphic novels. And the piano story of a friendship is definitely on that track. So tell us about graphic novels, Nandita. Why are they so trendy these days?
Well, I think they've always been trendy everywhere else but in India. But the good part is the past few years, this graphic novel genre is like opening up tremendously. I mean, the kind of content and the subject and even the readership, it's just becoming like a really, really wide space. So I think, like the next few years, you'll see a huge boom in the Indian graphic novel scenario, which I think is tremendous because we have some really, really, talented authors and writers and even people who collaborate. So I think you're going to find a lot of awesome stories out there, and which is great because we've all, like people who have been following the graphic novel genre and trend, we have just grown up reading mostly stuff either from Europe or America or Japan, so it's time we read our own stuff. So I think that's a good thing happening there.
I like that. I like our stories, so I'm quite excited about reading more of our stuff. Which kind of now brings me to the next question, which I'm going to pose to all of you. given the large gap that we have in terms of time, space, and experience between the book and the reader, and I think each of you has beautifully addressed the challenge of getting readers to feel a sense of closeness to characters, right? And not just the characters, but also the context. Now, these characters can be animate or inanimate. But if you had to mention one emotion that you hope readers would feel after reading your book, what would that emotion be? And let's just go in alphabetical order, starting with Ami.
Okay, so naturally I can't pick only one, but I'm gonna pick two close ones, or rather two contrasting ones. I hope my readers feel what I felt when I was a little girl listening to ancient stories, which was awe and comfort. So awe at this vastness of the mythological multiverse, as it were, this tremendous power of the goddess Kali, arms, weapons, and then, Vishnu, fast changing, fast talking, but also comfort that these powerful beings are also their friends, their guides, their protectors. And I really hope my readers enjoy hanging out with Ganesha and the gang, and that storytelling, story sharing flame, that torch, burns bright in all of their hearts, I guess. So.
Lovely. We'll move to Anupam.
So the Young Pandavas books are basically like children's adventure books, beyond being like mythological fantasy. And I would really like them to be page turners. So my hope is that their kids reading this are curious about, what happens next.
Well, curiosity is key. Otherwise, that's what we hope for. We hope to keep that flame alive. Aparna.
Empathy. I'd go with empathy because that's really the emotion that I hope they'll, the book will evoke in them, because these are lives that are not very familiar, or they're not lived experiences for many of us, right? I mean, the life in the farm is not our lived experience. We might know of hobby farmers, or we might have read about farmers, when they've gone through like great personal tragedy or like, extreme success. So we don't know much about the everyday life of a farmer. So I hope that, by presenting this in a fictionalized way, people will understand and empathize with the lives of, the people who put food on our table.
Yeah. Deepak?
Okay. Admiration, I would say. Admiration for Nayan Singh Rawat's guts, his powers of endurance, his never say die spirit. Because in a sense, he, while writing the book, for me, he became kind of an inspirational figure, because he tackled so many emergencies, so many tricky situations, and you can see the personal growth in the man. So I would definitely say admiration, and also think of him as a kind of a role model for, always keeping you cool under difficult circumstances.
Yes, Devika?
Rather than an emotion, I think what I would most like to evoke out of the adventures of the Kohinoor is a realization, because, the main character, the main protagonist is a stone. It's not just any stone, it's a diamond. And it's not just any diamond, it's the Kohinoor, which more than anything seems to still strike an emotional chord with most Indians. Of all the crores worth of colonial loot that was taken away from India, the question you'll most often hear is, when are we going to get the Kohinoor back? Why is it not, why is it not in the National Museum in Delhi? So that emotion, when you go back into the history of the diamond, the historical references, the historical trajectory, it's a story that's so full of nasty ruffians and plotters and murderers, and there's torture and there's wars and there's general mayhem. It's such a thrilling ride. The realization that truth can indeed be much stranger than fiction.
Very true. It's in a sense a little bit of incredulity.
Absolutely.
How could this happen?
Yeah, exactly. But it did,
Yes. Truth is definitely stranger than fiction. And Nanda will tell us also, because she followed a piano all the way from Germany to Calcutta. And then
Yeah, the piano kind of moved a bit, yes. No, so I mean, I think I would like my readers to feel a sense of warmth, because the book is all about friendship and loneliness, and I feel it's just a very universal emotion we all share, loneliness and looking for a friend. So I hope, the kids who read it, they did feel a sense of warmth after they read it. So that's one thing.
Thank you. So let's now zoom out a little bit and look at the big conversations that are taking place across geographies and cultures. I mean, there are larger global dialogues to which your books contribute to in meaningful ways. So I'm going to start with you, Devika. How does the Kohinoor examine post-colonial history? And then also tell our young readers a little bit about revisionism.
I think the important question is, who is telling your history? So in a post-colonial colonial scenario, you would want to re-examine the history of empires. You'd want to question, you'd want to question, you'd want to challenge what has been accepted history so far. Let me give you a quick example, the Bengal famine of 1943. According to historians, colonial historians, it happened because of the drought. And now we've had historians telling you that it had nothing to do with the drought. It had everything to do with colonial policies of taking away resources for the war effort, stopping imports of rice, starving to death 3 million people. The story of the Kohinoor came with its own ecosystem of myths and bizarre gossip. And it was literally a fog of mystery around a stone with so much of emotional connect. It was literally a symbol of India. And when you go into the history, you are rereading it from a historical point of view. You're getting historical inputs, you're getting new translations. So it's revised, you're re-looking at. I don't think any historian will ever balk at revision, because that's the nature of history. That is the rigor of the academic history, is that you are constantly looking for new information, new tools, new input, new evidence, but it's your intention in putting those out. And I think the earlier a child learns about this, about these tools of history and the rigor of historical academic inquiry, the better it is for the child, because then you find a true perspective of yourself in your present life. You question, you judge based on your own evidence. So I think that's really important.
Thank you for that. Actually, this is slightly off topic, but Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast called Revisionist History. Yeah. And the first one I ever listened to was on the Bengal famine. And I must have sobbed the entire duration of that podcast, because I'd never known that part of history. And you're right, unless we tell our own history, someone else will keep giving us their version of events.
Exactly.
Anupam, Devika sort of talked about the politics of telling our history. There's definitely politics in your book, for sure. I mean, it's some mythology, but there's definitely politics there. So what is a larger global conversation that the young Pandavas are a part of?
Right. So, I mean, dealing with something like the Mahabharata is quite intimidating, in the sense that not only is it, it kind of defines the word epic, right? It's one of the most epic epics out there. So it's got a lot of great stories, a lot of very complex stories, but it also comes with its own social and cultural baggage. And that would be really, I found that to be very intimidating, but the way I kind of psyched myself up was to kind of realize and to tell myself that retelling the Mahabharata is something that is a centuries-old tradition. I mean, in that sense, there is no single Mahabharata. There are so many Mahabharatas. And it's our responsibility to kind of recontextualize these traditions to our modern sensibilities. And to that effect, one thing that was very lucky about my book is that it's told through the point of view of Sahadev, who is the youngest Pandav, and who happens to be the most thoughtful of them. And because it's told from a personal point of view instead of like an omniscient or an objective point of view, you get to question everything that's happening around them. So I think something like the Mahabharata, you're absolutely right that it's full of politics. It's full of a lot of identity politics, and it's all about where you came from, what your antecedents are. But then, like, you have to question the validity of a lot of these things. And I hope I've done that to some effect in the story. I think that while I want to introduce kids to this great story, I don't want to contribute to like a calcification of their identity as, whatever, whoever they are, whoever they may be. So I hope there are more questions than answers in the book.
Right, and then kids will find meaning based on what's meaningful to them. So instead of you telling them this is how you should view and interpret the Mahabharata or this particular story from this person's perspective, they must continue to explore further. Deepa, I want to talk about Nansing Rawat a little bit because he literally had to tread lightly. And what I want to talk about is how did you manage your own historical bias against a colonialist when you penned his account?
Yeah, this is a bit of a thorny topic. And well, I was kind of torn between awe at, what Nansing Rawat had achieved and the uncomfortable fact that he was a British agent. And incidentally, he was my grandfather's uncle. So this was a bit of a controversial topic within our family too. Was he a spy? Some people denied it fiercely. No, a relative cannot be a spy. But, I accepted that truth, that definitely he was, he was an agent, he was gathering information. But on the other hand, I thought it was important to celebrate what he had accomplished. It was a tremendous thing he did, mapping Tibet at a time when it was totally unknown and facing so much hardship and danger on the way. And on the other hand, there were also some attenuating circumstances, like he was in dire financial straits. He badly needed that job. And apart from that, at that point of time, there was not so much anti-British feeling in that particular part of the country. In fact, the British had been hailed as saviors because there was Gurkha rule in the hills and the Gurkhas were extremely tyrannical. So when the British took over, people actually welcomed them. So these were it was a bit of a complex issue. So when I was writing the book, I decided to focus on his journeys and his achievements and keep that bit about his being a British agent in the background. So that's why I was, able to work on that book without having, doubts about should I be writing this, or is it acceptable? These are all the issues an author sometimes faces. Is it politically acceptable? And let me tell you, it was not easy getting this book published.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you did because it's much needed. And wow, I didn't realize that. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more about identity and historical biases because they do go hand in hand. So Nandita, what did you learn about historical bias or biases, based on your piano's crisscrossing across?
I won't really say, I don't think I would term it as a bias or anything, but what I did confront within myself also was how little we know about the Indians who fought in the First World War, Nobody knows about it. Very little snippets about it, but this is a war. 70,000 Indians lost their lives, close to 70K. Yeah? And how much do we know about it? We don't know. There are like endless graves throughout Europe, where like these Indian soldiers are lying there. But how much do we know about it? Even I didn't, and so this was something that struck me. And the second thing was, Indian women freedom fighters. Ask anybody for 5 Indian women fighters, freedom fighters, and they'll come up with 2 names. There are so many, and how seldom do we talk about them, or how little we have read about them. So these are the 2 things that kind of struck me when I was kind of writing this book and, kind of knitting the story around it. And that was something that was like a prominent thing with me.
Very true. Thank you. So I'm going to now bring this conversation back a little closer to home. Aparna, your book is, I mean, we all talk about gender bias quite openly, but what I found interesting is that you kind of bring into the background the bias against educated people going into agriculture. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
So yeah, I mean, as you very rightly said, we have, gender bias, which we do confront, and we, have many conversations, we engage on the subject. But when it comes to farming, it is still, kind of unknown. And I thought that was important to have a woman as a farmer from the gender point of view, because when we say farmer, for many of us, for me, for the longest time, it was always a man who came into.
Yes. Oh, Aparna, you have been muted somehow, and I think we are being Zoom bombed.
Sorry, I think I was, yeah. It was, if it's a progressive farmer, it was, a man on a tractor. And then when I think of a woman farmer, the only thing I think of is like, a row of women bending down and then transplanting paddy. I don't see them as people with agency. So I did want to present, women farmers as people with agency. Not just do they do 70% of the work, they only own 13% of the farmland. And I think it's time we started having conversations about this. The other part of it, what you talk about, the educated, the bias of the educated people. So I think India, we have this head versus hand hierarchy where we value very greatly any skill that is, any labor that is mental, a skill that comes from learning, a schooled skill, whereas traditional knowledge is always dismissed as something like, people have it, but it's of no worth. And then like people who have, say, a degree in agriculture, for example, will go and tell a farmer who's been doing this for like umpteen years, that they've been getting it all wrong. For them, it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of survival. They're not going to get it all wrong. They know what they're doing. That's why they're in the business of doing it. But we have this arrogance that comes with education that rubbishes everything which is not, school. I think that is a real problem because a lot of our history, a lot of our knowledge is oral knowledge. It's traditional knowledge. And I think it's time we moved out of this Eurocentric version of, what is knowledge, what is skill, those biases, to break those biases. And for that, we have to actually talk about the things that work, the traditional knowledge systems that work. And I think, hero it, so to speak. And I think in farming, we have many of those stories.
I agree with you. I don't think we need a study, across a population of 10,000 to figure out what actually works and what doesn't. Ami, I am so sorry. Janvi is Zoom bombing us, and we have to now move into the Q&A. So my last question to you on how the gods are going to save Earth, we'll have to wait for another time. Janvi, please, over to you.
I actually have only one question from the audience. If you do want to go ahead, Nasil, and ask this, and I am really sorry to be interrupting this really interesting conversation.
Okay, great. So, Ami, let's go back to the skies, and the gods are at a loss on how they're going to save Mother Earth. Share with us what your book says about climate change. And the last question of the day is, has Greta read your book?
I can only hope. No, thank you. I was like, we can't forget Mother Earth. But, it's interesting because I feel like most of the world is now catching on to this idea of protecting the earth. But we as Indians know that gratitude for Mother Earth is actually really ancient. And I think my young characters realize this when they invoke the goddess Bhumi. So I kind of personified Bhumi as a goddess who loves to garden and feed people. And she can't stop being generous, even to the demons who are just like, take from her. So I think she's super interesting because she's simultaneously very powerful and extremely vulnerable. And I think kids can probably relate to that as well. And so the torchbearers have to protect Bhumi in the same way all of us do, which is individual efforts, planting those seeds, farming the land, giving back, and innovating creative solutions, saving animals. And I hope that people will kind of come away from that imagining Bhumi as more than just what we walk on, thinking of her as that ever giving, ever generous mother. So.
Great, thank you. Well, that's it for the Junior Readers panel today. A big thanks to authors for putting down stories that broaden our view of the world. I mean, if our audience thinks that they just wrote a book, this was not just a book or a story. There's so many layers, and I hope all of you spend some time reading them and rereading them and explore those layers. So now, no matter what the outcome at the end of the day, each of you is undoubtedly a winner. So good luck. And again, audience, stay tuned because we're going to young adult next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I now ask Neev to come and take over.
Thank you, Ms. Young adult literature is a complicated category because it tackles the complexities of life for people who have little experience of it. It is different from books for early years, emerging readers, and junior readers because our horizontal and vertical identities are starting to form. We are ready for more complicated stories of pain, prejudice, and injustice while being ready for inspiration from anywhere. Experiencing these complexities vicariously through literature is a low-risk but authentic way for readers like me to explore these and many more questions. The 6 nominated books cover a diversity of topics. Gravefire School for the Deceased captures the spirit of adventure and the solace of home. Nomad's Land talks about the consequences of terrorism and displacement, but also the power of imagination and trust. Unga sits in deeply rooted issues that span from politics to the social and environmental spheres. Queen of Earth tells a story of empowerment and sacrifice. The Secret Life of Debbie G deals with the pressing and controversial issues surrounding social media. And lastly, The Teenage Diary of Razia Sultan captures an inspiring story of an individual working to break down barriers. This well-rounded collection of Indian authors, themes, and stories is relatively new for young adults in this country. Their view of the world is not wrong, but incomplete, because young adult literature has been dominated by Western stories. India clearly has a lot to offer. If a body of literature is how memory and identity are transmitted from one generation to the next, what children read must reflect what it means to be Indian, where India is coming from, where India is going, what stories are native to this subcontinent, and who we are. As Chimamanda Adichie's wonderful TED Talk, The Dangers of a Single Story, reminds us, stories possess great power in the fact that they can capture the diversity of the world and its people. This category of the Neev Book Awards spreads awareness of Indian narratives, empowering us as readers to see our rich cultural heritage not as a hindrance to modernity, but as an instrument of identity, a cauldron of creativity, and a forest of diversity. We will now hear from a student of the diploma program about her thoughts on the Neev Book Awards, as well as one of her favorite books. This will be followed by a quick look at the books shortlisted in this category before leading into a panel discussion moderated by Kavita Gupta Sabharwal with the authors shortlisted in this category.
Hi, my name is Meher and I'm going to be talking to you about the Neev Book Awards. So a vast number of books on my bookshelf are both from the Neev Book Award lists over the years or are written by Indian authors. Prior to the first Neev Literature Festival, I had barely ever encountered Indian literature, to be honest. I was far too lost in the world of J.K. Rowling and Jacqueline Wilson, amongst others. And I don't mean to imply that it was a bad thing, but I'm sure most of us were or still are in the same boat, unaware of the rich Indian literature out there. And that's a shame, for the diversity and unique colors of India seeps into its literature. But now, in the comfort of my own room, I as an Indian have explored parts of this country that I had never heard of before, along with cultures and characters I never knew existed. From the formidable Queen Dida of Lahore to the Chair dynasty and beyond. Herein lies the importance of Neev Book Awards. I especially enjoyed reading Queen of Earth by Devika Rangachari. Much like her previous novel, Queen of Ice, this book showed me the courage and resilience of extraordinary Indian women whose brilliance is often left out of our history textbooks and popular literature. Thank you. Happy reading.
Thank you, Noor, and thank you, Meher, for sharing that. Yes, thank you. Welcome to the Young Adult Panel Discussion. My name is Kavita Gupta Sabharwal, and I love to read. Before inviting our panelists, some housekeeping rules. Please post your questions in the Q&A box only and specify if you want a particular panelist to answer them. Raising your virtual hand will not be helpful as we cannot call on you. Questions in the Q&A box only. Detailed bios of the panelists will be in the chat box, but I will briefly introduce the fabulous I welcome Anita Murthy, author of The Teenage Diary of Razia Sultan, published by Speaking Tiger. And I welcome Bal Sahitya Academy Award winner and prolific writer, author of Nomad's Land, published by Speaking Tiger also. I welcome Devika Rangachari, author of Queen of Earth, published by the Duckbill imprint of Penguin. I welcome Vibha Batra, author, illustrator of graphic novel The Secret Life of Debbie G, published by HarperCollins. And finally, Devashish.
Sorry, Kavita, but I'm not the illustrator. Kalyani Ganpati is.
I'm sorry, my error. Thanks for clarifying that. And welcome to Devashish Bakija, filmmaker and first-time author of Unga, published by Tulika. And finally, Anita Roy, joining us from Somerset, author of Grave Pyre School for the Recently Deceased, published by Amazon's Red Panda imprint. A warm welcome to all of you. Young adult literature runs from 12 to 18 years, a difficult age to write for, not only because of the age range, but also what's appropriate for one reader's context and life may not be for another's. With 12 to 18-year-olds, the boundaries of their identity are fluid but forming. We want them to be thoughtful and open-minded about their own lives and those of others, the ones that they see and the ones they don't see right around them. Three broad trends in this category globally are romance, social issues, and escape from life and to the other worlds. Our shortlist this year covers all three categories, with the unique narratives of India through history, environment, mythology, and power. So to all of my panelists, would you share in a couple of minutes what your book is about and why or how this matters in a 12 to 18-year-old's life and what you want them to think or feel as they are reading? Can we start with Paro?
Thank you, Kavita, and thank you, Neev, for this wonderful effort of promoting and really honoring children's literature. Nomad's Land is about, well, I'll tell you why I started writing it. I was talking about my books, No Guns at My Son's Funeral and Weed at a school, and a young girl stood up and asked, why have you not written about Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir? And why don't you have a girl protagonist? And those were both very true observations. So I said, I must do that. So I started thinking about a story about a Kashmiri Pandit girl. And really, somehow the Kashmiri Pandit story is less sexy, you know, than the other side of it, which I've written extensively about. While starting to write and starting to think about it, I realized that there are so many stories of displacement, of forced displacement, people who belonged suddenly having to cut their roots and flee. The more I was writing, it became more and more urgent. Think of the Rohingyas, the migrants during the pandemic, people who are forced to become nomads. And then where do they belong? So that is essentially what the book is about. But looking at, I wanted two characters, and I knew one would be a Kashmiri Pandit girl, but who was the other person? And I wanted to pull threads from many different stories and people. And so I made up my own, the Kushavans, the happy people who are also forced out. So I made a language, a people, their customs and everything. The book is also about the need to belong, friendship and stepping up when somebody needs you. It's also about overcoming herd hatred, the hatred that children hear all the time, and raising the questions and becoming empathetic human beings.
Thank you for sharing that, Paro. Anita, can I invite you to share? Anita Murthy, can I invite you to share next?
Thank you so much, Kavita and Neev. My book is The Teenage Diary of Razia Sultan, and it's part of the Teenage Diary series by the publisher of different Indian queens. And, you know, history, everybody likes history, it's all fascinating, but when it's reduced to, you know, a dreary list of dates or series of battles, it becomes very dry. And I think historical fiction really helps us imagine the richness of their lives, makes these historical characters very intimate and real to us. And that's what I've tried to do in Razia. I've tried to reimagine her as a teenager, grappling with, you know, the usual problems, universal problems of teenage identity, of crazy hormones, of trying to, you know, identify what she's going to grow into. And I've used the historical information as a framework and have tried to imagine what things could have influenced her growth and made her the remarkable person that she became. You know, I hope I've done justice. She's a brilliant character in history, and I learned so much from all the research. So I do hope that, you know, it strikes a chord with the teens reading this book.
Thank you, Anita. And can I ask Anita Roy to share next?
Thanks very much, Kavita. Lovely to see you all again. Here I am in the depths of Somerset in England, where it's a long, in a different time zone, but very much in the same headspace, I hope. Gravefire School for the Recently Deceased really came out of a single sentence that occurred to me, which I think resonates in the heart of all, particularly Indian children, but children all over the world, which is that wherever you do, whatever the circumstances, there will always be homework. So this idea really came to me that there's a boy who's just died and he wakes up, as it were, comes to consciousness in a school, and he is trying to make sense of the fact that he's dead, and he is being given homework, and he says, "Homework, but I'm dead." And the person handing him the homework says, "Yeah, I mean, like, that's not such a big deal." So from that seed of an idea grew a story about a young boy from Delhi who discovers that he is now in the afterlife. And this is an afterlife that nobody has really prepared him for. He certainly didn't expect to be in a school. He certainly didn't expect being dead to be so blooming hard. So he definitely wants to get back to his family and to his life and his ordinary school back in Delhi. So it's I think of the three categories that you were talking about earlier, Kavita, this is definitely an escape book. It's a book that I hope that children will want to, it'll be a page turner, hopefully, for people to find out what happens next. Like, what is this school? Does he manage to get home? What adventures does he have? And how do you actually reconcile being a mortal human being with being a thinking, feeling person? It's very much also to do with a kind of shift in mindset about the ecology and about the kind of unbalance that we currently have in our modern society, where we're kind of out of sync with the natural world and the natural cycle of things. So that's also in there as well. Plus it has talking vultures. I mean, who doesn't like talking vultures?
Thank you, Anita. I'd forgotten that homework bit in there with all of the other concepts of afterlife and the talking vultures and the not yetis. So much in there. Fabulous. Can I invite Devika to share next?
Thank you, Kavita. So Queen of Earth is the story of Prithvi Mahadevi, who ruled the Bhaumakara dynasty of Orissa in the 9th century CE. She was basically ruling over a hostile populace because her father had conquered the kingdom and she became the ruler. And it is basically the story of how she manages to, maintain a hold on the throne with a lot of courage, with a lot of political shrewdness, despite her youth. And it is important for young adults to read, I think, because there is a gender bias in the writing of history where women have been routinely either made invisible or, they've been made to seem trivial and irrelevant past. And Prithvi Mahadevi is only one in a series of remarkable women rulers whom I think only, academics would know about, or even if they know about, they probably don't know too much. And young adults would probably never get to read about, her in their textbooks or anywhere else. And why is it relevant? Because, I think youngsters deal with gender bias all the time in today's context in every sphere of life, or if they haven't yet encountered it, they are going to encounter it. And so this story is inspiring in that sense that, a woman so far removed from them in time is able to actually contravene feminine stereotypes to maintain a whole in a patriarchal environment, and how she went about doing so. And I think, but despite the fact that she's so far removed from the world of today in terms of time, I hope that youngsters reading this would find her very relatable, because she's actually going through the same issues that they all go through at this stage in their lives, just trying to figure out, her identity, trying to figure out her strengths and weaknesses, trying to figure out how far she would go, she wanted to achieve a particular ambition, how far she would go to actualize her potential. These are all issues that I think young adults deal with or are beginning to deal with, at the stage of their lives. So I hope that they do read the story and find that it's not as dull and boring as history is notoriously made out to be, but actually a very interesting tale of a woman who deserves to be known as a part of our collective historical past.
Thank you, Devika. Devashish, can I ask you to share your fascinating story of the current times, but a story that we knew so little about?
So Unga actually finds its origins in a little anecdote. A friend of mine, Sharanya Nayak in South Orissa, she works a lot with the Adivasi. And so in 2009, when a film called Avatar had released, and she took a bunch of people, the Adivasi who worked with her, to go watch Avatar. And they got really emotional when they were watching that story play out on that screen. A lot of them felt that this was their story. And although it was playing out as fantasy, there was a lot of resonance that they found with that story that was playing out on screen. But when it ended, they were disappointed because it ended very hopefully. Everything got resolved. All those little neat ends were tied up. And they were like, this doesn't happen to us. Why does our story not play out this way? So I sort of took it as a mission to tell their story almost in that Avatar kind of a fantastical, adventurous, mythological space, but it'll end in a way where it raises questions and hopefully makes not just young adults, but all adults till the age of 105 question, the things that we are made to believe about development, about what is good for us and progress. And, like in our textbooks, we, growing up, we've always been told about these big dams that sort of changed the history of modern India, but no one told us about all those people who paid the price for those dams being built. So hopefully Unga, through its little adventurous, little allegorical, journey, makes all of us ask those questions that no one else, encourages us to.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Devashish. It's an amazing book. I'm looking forward to watching the movie as well. And Vibha, would you please share? This could be a story that could be the story of all of our children.
Thanks, Kavita. Okay, so The Secret Life of Debbie G, which has only been written by me, is the story of a 16-year-old, and she who must not be named because spoiler alert, and she becomes a social media sensation overnight, except it's a secret persona that hits big time. And why is it relevant? Okay, here's a confession. I think of myself as a young adult, and I usually write about stuff that I grapple with. In this case, body shaming, bullying, peer pressure, and the thing that makes the world go round, the thing that we can't get enough of. No, not love, social media.
Thank you. So moving on, I think it's young adult carries very complex narratives and often about very difficult topics. Can I ask maybe one or two of you to share? What did you struggle with? What did you leave out because you were writing for children? How do you handle being honest and appropriate? How do you keep that balanced with being honest and being appropriate? Paro, would you like to share?
Well, yeah, ever since somebody described me as being a fearless writer, it kind of became almost a burden, almost a responsibility. So I asked myself, is there something that I won't write about? And I realized over a few stories that the one thing that I didn't want to do when writing for young adults especially was to leave the story in a very hopeless place. The teenage years are a dark time. So I totally agree with Devashish that, it's sometimes everything doesn't end up with pink bows and pretty endings, but still just a glimmer of hope at the end of a very dark tunnel is that one taboo. And I feel very sad that in the larger world of children's literature, somehow the powers that be are more comfortable with death and violence in children's literature than with sex and love. And so that is something that we really need to correct.
Thank you, Paro. Can I ask maybe one more panelist to share? Maybe Anita Roy, if you'd like to share on this. Did you have to leave out something? And how do you handle being honest and appropriate?
I think it's a really, really important question because it's, as a writer, I think, and this is advice to anyone who's listening in who wants to become a writer, you have to kind of give yourself permission to write in the first instance as though there are no things that are off limits. I think very often you come back to a story or you come back to working on a story or a manuscript at a second stage where you then begin to think about whether this is appropriate for a particular audience or not, or how to deal with that. For me, writing this book, death is not something that is, death is very much a taboo subject in many, many places. And it was difficult to write a book. What I wanted to do was to write a story, an adventure story, a fun story, a story that was full of lightness and enjoyment, and yet one which dealt with the most difficult, the bleakest subject in a way that any person will have to deal with in their lifetime. And it's something that we all have to deal with. This is the only thing that we will all have to deal with, each one of us. Is the question of loss of someone that we love, or it's the facing of our own fragility, our own mortality. I did not want to soft soap that, even though I was writing for a young audience. So I guess of all of the books on this shortlist, mine is probably towards the younger end of young adult. So in my head, I think of it as a young adult book, YYA. Like Paro, I think it's really important to be honest about something which is very hard, but it's equally important to not leave the young reader, a child or a young adult, in a position of hopelessness. So I didn't want to soft soap the ending or say that actually death isn't final. But I also wanted to find a way of talking about reconceiving death, shifting the paradigm, seeing it something natural and not hopeless. And I hope that the ending, when you get to that point, will leave you in a very good place. in the darkest place, but a very good place. Yeah, that was my inspiration.
Thanks for sharing that, Anita. And I just, I know we are being asked to move to the audience questions, but I just have to ask one question to Devashish because of his what he faces both with movies and with and now with a book which is challenging, but a beautiful and a very well told story. Devashish, would you share your thoughts on sort of zooming out and how should kids decide which books or movies to read or watch? What is the role of a gatekeeper or other tools that can help them decide that?
I'll I'll take a step back first, and just riffing off something Anita just said. Like, her book is towards the young adult, the lower side of the 12 to 18 young adult segment. Mine really is towards the adult young adult. Like on the website, we say it's 16 plus, but because the young adult space is such a wide age spectrum, that is really hard to find where you can fit your story. So what I did, and I was encouraged by Tulika, my publishers too, was to not really censor myself. Now, when I say not censor myself, I face a lot of censorship with my films as well. And I believe a parent or an adult who is maybe choosing or guiding a youngster to what they should read, what they should consume, how they should think, let's remind ourselves that when our child learns to walk, what is the first thing we do? We let the child walk, and we find in ourselves the stamina and the strength to catch them when they fall. Instead of telling them that, you walk and you will fall and you'll hurt yourself, we don't say that. We say, walk, we'll catch you when you fall. So I think young adults especially should be allowed to explore. If they make mistakes, it's up to us to have the stamina to sort of have those difficult, complex conversations and find a way forward jointly. Because especially with my films, what I've seen is that a government just clamps down on a certain kind of storytelling or on certain themes or a way to show things. They just don't want you to do that because they are afraid it will lead to something. But if you allow us to express ourselves and engage, when it gets really complicated, engage. Let's all have difficult conversations. Why are we so scared to have dialogue? So yes, I would just like to give that freedom to the young adult to choose.
Yeah, and these are very difficult issues. Society, social issues, power, caste, many things that we turn a blind eye to. Stereotypes, gender stereotypes. So there's so much out there, and young adult, the book list is just fabulous on that. I think it's just that, and let's not forget that our children are seeing, hearing, reading all of it online in a 24/7 world anyway. So it's time to have those conversations with those books. Thank you so much for sharing that, Devashish. And with that, I'll hand over to our reading team, who will take us through, hopefully, a couple of audience questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kavita. Thank you, panelists. That was an educative and an enlightening discussion. So I have one question for all of you from the audience. All of you seem to have explored such an exciting gamut of Indian literature. How different is this from the global trend of YA literature today? Is Indian YA literature going off on a different tangent than the global trend, or is it all moving together?
Devika, would you like to take that question?
I think Indian YA is moving closer to the Western model, and that's a welcome change, because earlier we were fighting shy of talking about, say, dysfunctional families, which apparently is not an Indian reality, and various other issues like that. There is a lot of hysteria, or was a lot of hysteria, there still is a lot of hysteria displayed by gatekeepers about the fact that their children cannot possibly handle violence in books or other sensitive topics, but otherwise allow them without any qualms to consume all that on social media or other forms. So I think that the way we're going is a very welcome direction, and I think we just go from strength to strength from here on.
I'm wondering what Vibha thinks about it as well.
Okay, so I was told by a couple of well-intentioned people that my book would never be welcomed by parents or schools alike. So thank you, Kavita and Neev, for proving them wrong. I just think that, what's one person's appropriate is another person's ban. So where does it end? So I think it is time to have those conversations, those difficult conversations, and include our children and young adults, and even adults who think that they don't want to grow up.
Paro would like to share.
Quickly, I just wanted to say that I think that Indian children's YA literature is very advanced, and I think in many ways is much braver than what is coming from the West. Anthony Horowitz, who read a couple of my books, said, you know, they're really great books, but I don't think that England would publish them. They're too much for young YA.
I hope we will prove some of that wrong as we go to our next stage with the Book Award. Sneha, do we have any more time for other questions?
No, unfortunately, we have run out of time, Ms. Kavita.
All right. So we will stop there. And I just want to say that no matter which book wins from this category, all 6 of them are winners. I've loved reading all of them. And so we hope that we can get them to many, many bookshelves. So thank you so much. Please stay with us for the jury announcement which is next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We value the book awards because of what they bring to us as a community, a recognition to the homegrown authors of India today, who are instrumental in building the world of children and shaping their perspectives long into the future. I have enjoyed reading the nominated books, even beyond my own category. Each book brings a new context to the growing Indian literature landscape, providing me and you as readers new horizons to explore. I know that I am rooting for my favorite books. I hope that after this reading journey, you are too. Without further ado, I invite the members of the Neev Book Awards jury to come on screen.
The Neev Book Award recognizes outstanding writing that leads to deeper and fuller understandings of the complexity of Indian lives and stories. The award aims to raise awareness nationally and globally about original, distinguished, and diverse children's literature from India and its diaspora.
The award is a platform to discover stories and voices with fresh, different, and yet relatable perspectives. It promotes children's books with Indian characters and settings so that children can see aspects of themselves and their worlds reflected in the literature they read.
Shayantani Dasgupta, author of the Kiranmala series, reminds us that we humans may not be powerful or magical, but the stories we pass on to our children can be. On behalf of all the members of our jury, it is our hope that our Neev Book Award shortlist is just such a gift to the generations, bringing the power and magic of reading to children everywhere.
Each year, publishing houses nominate their best books for the awards. This year, our jury has been especially busy as we had 21 publishers submit a total of 114 titles. Of these, we shortlisted 23 titles across 4 award categories. This evening, we are joined by jury members from around the world to announce our 4 winners.
We have had months of deliberations on these books and would like to take a moment to humbly and gratefully recognize that the Neev Book Awards are here to celebrate all our shortlisted books published during a most extraordinary year.
Each book on this list is special in the hearts and minds of children, parents, librarians, and educators. We recognize all the creators for making these stories and the publishers for ensuring diversity in stories to inspire young people in all settings.
A reminder to our audience, please post your comments and questions in the chat box. Though we will not be taking any questions live, we would love to hear from you.
Pleased to introduce the jurors who will now announce the winner of the early years and the emerging readers categories. Dr. Anuradha Ruhel Barua joins us from Singapore, where she is an IB diploma teacher of English and Hindi at United World College of Southeast Asia. She believes in deep reading and encouraging critical thinking for children of all ages. Geeta Vardarajan is an elementary school teacher based in Princeton, New Jersey. As an author, Geeta is a co-author of a middle grade fiction book and author of a picture book. Every day, she has the pleasure and honor to read stories to children.
Dr. Myra Garces Baxal is the Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies for the College of Education at the United Arab Emirates University in Abu Dhabi. She is a well-recognized expert on international picture books for children. We invite Anu, Geeta, and Myra to introduce a shortlist in the early years category and announce a winner.
In our early years category, we enjoyed heartwarming stories that were fun and whimsical, as well as deep and profound. From a grandfather with a green thumb to a cat troubled by Diwali, another cat lost and found, to stories about little boys, one confused by the things he's told he can and cannot do, while another worries about the tension in his family. All these stories teach us about the power of family, community, and kindness.
The gorgeous illustrations and lyrical texts will delight readers as they go on journeys alongside the characters. Let's take a moment to review and celebrate our 2021 shortlist. The books nominated for the early years category are
Ammu and the Sparrows by Vinita, illustrated by Jayesh Shivan. This tug-at-your-heart book shows the pain and confusion that children go through when their parents separate. As little Ammu grapples with these complex emotions, the message from the family of sparrows he observes, as well as the quiet presence of his Amama, gives him a sense of reassurance and relief. This deep story is told with simple elegance through illustrations that create a serene space for readers to reflect on their emotions alongside Ammu and Amama. Cat Come Back by Lavanya Karthik, illustrated by Aisha Sadar and Ishan Dasgupta. In this highly interactive and engaging picture book, the onus is on the reader to find the missing cat by looking for clues and playing the role of detectives. The accordion-like format further creates wonder with surprise lurking in every corner. When cat is finally found, the reader is sure to applaud and perhaps go back to the book again and again to experience the joy of this reading journey. The lyrical writing, paired with the playful illustrations, is sure to take readers on a joyride.
Cat's Diwali by Sarah H. Paul, illustrations by Urvashi Dubey. It's Diwali, and Cat, the house pet, is excited about the Festival of Lights. She loves the decorations, but she's not so enthusiastic about the sounds. This simple and sensitive story explores Diwali from the perspective of a feline. Gorgeously drawn in rich colors, the story fosters greater consideration for animals. Tata's Pumpkin by Lalita Iyer, illustrations by Proiti Roy. Tia's Tata has grown an enormous pumpkin. It's bigger than her head and almost the size of her table. Now he wants to make a special pumpkin halwa on her birthday. This story about a little girl, her grandfather, and a pumpkin, beautifully told and gorgeously illustrated, celebrates the bonds within family and community.
The Big Thoughts of Little Love by Karan Johar, illustrations by Priya Korean. Little Love and his twin sister Kusha have a lot in common. Not only do they look a lot like each other, but they also like the same things. Love doesn't understand why he cannot wear pink, or a dress, or cry like his sister. A powerful story that challenges gender expectations and forces us to examine our preconceived notions of what it means to be a boy or a girl. This simple story with vibrant illustrations teaches us to let children be who they are.
Moo Done It by C.G. Salamander, illustrations by Aindri C. It's said when you snooze, you lose. This is a story about a curious girl, a hungry thief, a confused constable, perplexed parents, and a cart full of missing vegetables. Amma and Appa reckon a thief must have dropped out of the sky, But Ammu doesn't buy it. Our budding sleuth follows one clue after another until she catches the thief red-handed. Told and illustrated in a humorous and engaging style, this book will keep readers in stitches. Best wishes to all the wonderful books and talented creators on our shortlist.
And now to announce our winner.
This year's winner is a story of hope and reassurance for young children who are dealing with complex emotions as the adults in their lives are wrestling with change. It is a brave and powerful story narrated with simplicity and elegance.
Congratulations to the winner of the 2021 Neev Book Award in the Early Years category, Ammu and the Sparrows by Vinita, illustrated by Jayesh Shivan and published by Pratham Books.
We applaud the author and illustrator for their exceptional work in conveying this important message to young readers.
And now on to the Emerging Readers category, which had inspired stories with powerful protagonists who were problem solvers, investigators, climate champions, winners against all odds.
These complex and compelling characters took us on journeys that kept us at the edge of our seats.
The nominees for the 2021 Neev Book Award for the Emerging Reader category are
Friends Behind Walls by Harshika Udasi. The complex and curious characters of Shanti Park come to life in this hilarious and compelling story of Putti and Inu, who become friends behind walls, literally. The story brings out the power of friendship and the brilliance of children in breaking barriers and solving problems.
Minnie's Questions by Nandini Nayar and illustrated by Isha Nagar. Readers will relate to Minnie's inquisitive and relentless nature, her curiosity, keen powers of observation, and knack to connect the dots helps her solve mysteries and save the day. Minnie could teach a lesson or two to the adults around her who seem pretty oblivious, making this a laugh out loud read.
The Chirmi Chasers by Arifa Tehseen. When a ragtag team of Sitolia players from Madhopur Government School take on the famed Madhopur High team, they know it is more than a game between rivals, one that might change their lives. This page-turner highlights the popular street sport of Sitolia and touches on important themes of class and gender in ways that are accessible to young readers.
The Clockwaller's Clues by Varsha Sheshan. Jasmine and Sheba play the role of young detectives as they go on a wild goose chase looking for clues all over Tippu Gully and Main Street. Time management is not one of their strong suits, but if the girls are indeed to carry out their mission of rescuing stray puppies, then they must solve the time puzzle Clockwalla uncle has set for them. As they race against time, readers will be taken on this fast-paced ride all the way to a nail-biting finish, an irresistible read with a satisfying end.
The Miracle on Sunderbag Street by Nandita Dakunha, illustrations by Priya Korean. Young Zara's dreams of color and Miss Guppy's wisdom transform Sunderbag Street from gloom to bloom. Told simply and powerfully, this narrative tale with collage art empowers a child to refashion her community and brings out a child's agency to transform a place and consequently herself and the people around her. Best wishes to all the incredible books and talented creators in our shortlist. And now to announce our winner.
This year's winner conveys an important message which is especially relevant today. As we grapple with the effects of human indifference on keeping our earth healthy, this book shows young readers that where there's a will, there's a way, and children indeed must lead the way.
Congratulations to the winner of the 2021 Neev Book Award in the Emerging Reader category. The Miracle of Sunderbag Street written by Nandita Dakuna, illustrated by Priya Kurian, published by Kalpavriksha.
We applaud the author and illustrator for demonstrating the power of community with this remarkable book. We are pleased to introduce you to the jurors who will announce the winner of the Junior Readers category.
Dr. Kamakshi Murthy is a retired university professor based near Washington, D.C. As an academic writer, she explores multicultural and gender issues. As a writer of fiction for children, she advocates for diversity in many forms. From Beijing, we have Nadine Bailey, an IB school teacher librarian. She believes that we need a wide range of books that can serve as mirrors to our diverse multicultural reading communities.
Bangalore-based Rasil Kaur Ahuja is our jury co-chair, a person of many avatars, including children's book author. She works tirelessly behind the scenes to promote a love of reading and to make successful initiatives like the Neev Literature Festival. We now invite Kamakshi, Nadine, and Rasil to join us for the Junior Readers Awards announcement.
Thank you. Every title in the Junior Reader category takes readers on epic adventures involving mortals and gods, stigma and prejudice, greed and power, exploration and discovery, and love and war. The nominees for the 2021 Neev Book Award in the Junior Readers category are
Journey to a Forbidden City by Deepa Agarwal. In 1865, 007 went by the name Nain Singh Rawat. Instead of cool gadgetry, Rawat used leg stride and prayer beads as tools to measure and map the land of Tibet. An antidote to the usual story of colonial exploration and discovery for the colonialists' own ends, Rawat overcomes all sorts of obstacles to succeed in his mission.
No Nonsense Nandini by Aparna Karthikeyan is a powerful story of a single mother running a Sampangi farm. It highlights the stigma against educated people going into agriculture and the prejudice against women farmers. The book is a refreshing change from the usual story of debt and land grabbing.
The Adventures of Koh-i-Noor by Devika Karyapa and William Dalrymple and Anita Anand uses the infamous diamond as a literary device to create an approachable account of the history of the Indian subcontinent. It reenacts and contextualizes how an inanimate object was imbued with symbolic value of power, status, and the right to rule.
The Piano, Story of a Friendship by Nandita Basu, takes us on a journey across time and space. Using music as a leitmotif for friendship, the author captures a range of complex issues such as identity politics, friendship, and loss.
The Torchbearers by A.P. Majmudar is a modern retelling of an age-old beloved tale. The battleground is Earth and the gods are losing. There isn't a dull moment and the book keeps readers at the edge of their seats.
Young Pandavas. The City of Elephants by Anupam Arunachalam is a retelling of an ancient epic that is no child's play. Through Sahadev's point of view, readers get a glimpse of family politics, twisted plots, and palace intrigue with an equal dose of drama and comedy. Our celebrations to all the fantastic books and talented creators on the shortlist.
And now to announce our winner. And that would be my cue. This year's winner takes us on a journey with a stone that has held captive our collective imagination across continents and centuries. And while it may have been recut to suit modern sensibilities, the gem remains the mountain of light through which passes a wealth of history.
Congratulations to the Neev Book Award winner for 2021 in the Junior Readers category, The Kohinoor by Devika Cariappa, William Dalrymple, and Anita Anand, published by Juggernaut.
We applaud the authors for narrating this fascinating and adventurous history that young people everywhere will have difficulty putting down.
We are pleased to welcome the jurors who will now announce the winner of the Young Adult category. Colin Kilman is the head of English at the Neev Academy in Bangalore. He teaches many things, but foremost is the love of reading.
From Bangkok, we have our jury co-chair, Dr. Dhulika Sarhadi Raj, whose scholarly research and publications focus on partition and the Indian diaspora. Deeply passionate about literature, she has been a reading advocate in 5 international schools and has taught anthropology at Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale. Katie Day is an international school teacher librarian working in Singapore. She has helped establish various awards for children's literature in Asia, and her constant goal is to get the right book in a child's hand at the right time.
We now welcome Colin, Dhulika, and Katie to join us for the Young Adult category announcement.
The Young Adult category had a unique depth and breadth this year. The jury read of heroes and heroines reflecting India in all its complexity. We enjoyed innovations of narration using forms such as the graphic novel and historical fiction.
From modern urban teens navigating online identities to a young Indigenous boy trying to save his village from bauxite mining, and from unknown tales in the hidden gendered archives of 2 young women who shaped Indian history to young girls facing the long shadows of displacement, all these books show protagonists grappling with uncertainty and exhibiting resilience.
Let's now take a moment to review and celebrate our 2021 shortlist, especially all that these books managed to accomplish in their page-turning narratives. The books nominated for Young Adult are
Grave Pyre's School for the Recently Deceased by Anita Roy. In this exciting supernatural adventure, tinged with whimsy and nods to a mixture of spiritual traditions, the main character Joseph is surprised to wake up as a transitioner in a boarding school for newly dead children. Homesick and wanting to return to his human life, he learns that only vultures have the ability to travel back to the land of the living. In the end, he and his guide Mishi embark on a quest to restore hope in both worlds. Nomad's Land by Paro Anand. This powerful tale of hope is told through the voices of 2 girls from traumatized refugee families, both from forever skies, mountain homelands on opposite sides of India. Shana and Pima meet at a weekly boarding school near Delhi and gradually find a new home within the safe embrace of their friendship, while also helping to heal enmities within their communities through traditional rituals and medicines.
Unga by Devashish Makhija. Simply put, this is an adventure of a young tribal boy in a city, but it soon moves well beyond the conventions of the genre. It is densely layered with many dark, interacting subtexts: government brutality and ignorance, urban apathy and greed, and what it means to be human amid gross injustice. It honors tribal stewardship and wisdom about nature, and also discusses the abuses tribal people endure. The Teenage Diary of Razia Sultan by Anita Murthy. This book is characterized by all that one imagines of the courts of Delhi's rulers in the 13th century. Intrigue, plotting, assassination, complicated power struggles, from the point of view of a young female protagonist, Razia. It is significantly rich in cultural detail manifest in the setting, the dialogue, and in the thoughts of its main character.
The Secret Life of Debbie G. by Vibha Batra and Kalyani Garabati. This courageous book addresses issues from the point of view of a young teen girl whose divorced mother decides to marry a widower. Debbie G. is interesting, ambitious, and inclusive in its representations of characters and families presented in an innovative format, a comic book within a graphic novel. It takes the reader into a deep dive, one text and alter ego at a time, while teens make and navigate their brave new online worlds. Queen of Earth by Devika Rangachari. Historical fiction with a strong Indian female protagonist set in early medieval Orissa. This is a story of Prithvi Mahadevi, an invisible feminist, ambitious to become a queen while navigating the royal courtly life in two kingdoms. Impeccably researched, the author makes a difficult, little-known history accessible and engaging, resulting in a highly readable story and history for contemporary YA audience. As you can sense from our descriptions, the jury had a very difficult decision to make this year. Best wishes to all the thought-provoking books and talented creators on this shortlist.
And now to announce our winner.
This year's winner is a mature book, definitely one for the older young adults. The narrative includes elements of the onomatopoeic, the impressionistic, and the magical in its scathing attack on corruption, apathy, and in showing the suffering of indigenous people. The Neev Book Award Young Adult winner for 2021 is Unga by Devashish Makhija.
Please join us in congratulating the author and publisher for winning in this category with this remarkable book.
Congratulations again to all the winners. You know, our awards honor all those involved in the creation of children's literature about India. We applaud your contributions to building a rich body of work featuring the diversity of this country and the lives of its people. The jury would like to thank all the authors, illustrators, publishers, and a big shout out to all the young and the young at heart readers for celebrating with us today. Thank you so much for your time.
When I was young, I read, or rather heard my mom recite the text of my favorite books so many times that I had the words memorized. As my mom worked at her desk, or my dad was on a conference call, I would flip from page to page reciting the words. My first book sparked my current love for reading, so I often go back to the wall of picture books maintained in our house to get perspective. From The Hungry Caterpillar to Lala Rose to Velma Gretchen the Way Cool Butterfly. These narratives provided solace because they were familiar territory, and they provided imagination because my life was just starting. The only challenge was that while the characters felt familiar or universal, their situations or settings did not. There were very few stories that taught me about my culture and the struggles of my community, people, and nation. We don't have to be Western to be modern, but we do have to be modern, and having our own literature and identity is key to being modern. As I get older and start intersecting with the world of adults, I realize that I'm fortunate to be born into privilege. However, even though my life is a bubble, it is a porous one. information and experiences seep and letting me see people who don't look or speak like me. India is not made of one narrative, but many. And what we need to capture this diversity is books that push for a more fair India, a more equitable India for all Indians. Books that spread awareness of dreams of people who could have very well been me. Barriers always exist, but we must question who makes them and how can we break them down. This list of phenomenal stories is a step towards this dismantling or revitalizing. They make us ask, who are we? Or more importantly, who do we want to be? It has been almost 8 decades since Gandhiji said, I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about in my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. Over this time, India has become more comfortable with its place in the world. By the time of India's 100th birthday in 25 years, I'm confident that India's children's literature will reflect the rich diversity, identity, and quiet confidence that India has to offer the world. My huge congratulations to the 23 authors, 14 publishers, and 4 winners. You have told us important stories that would have otherwise gone unheard. Thank you to the jury members for taking such a huge step in an important direction. The many hundreds of hours of reading you have experienced have made a true impact on Indian literature. The jury is truly an embodiment of what this award aims to stand for: diversity, power, and integrity. And lastly, thank you, young and young at heart readers, for celebrating with us today. We hope to see you again at the Neev Book Awards 2022. Until then, happy reading.